Buildings ADA coordinator.
Baseball, director of building and public works.
With the House Village Becker Park.
Fantastic. And for those of you in the chat, if you can put in your name and role, that'd be greatly appreciated. As you may have heard, this is being recorded today, so if anybody's uncomfortable with that, please let us know, but general disclaimer that we give, I will hand it off to Jamie. If you want to do a quick.
Let me grab that. Our order did not come in. Of this training program for ADA transition plans and ADA and accessibility in the right of way. CMAP is making a really big program push to increase accessibility throughout the region. And this is really our first component of a multi-year project to increase accessibility. As we all know, it impacts our daily lives. More accessible communities leads to a better, more thriving region. So this is one of many training programs that we're offering through 2024. So I'm so glad that you could be here with us in person. And for those online, thank you for joining us. Again, apologies for the late start. I think we're getting all the kinks worked out, but we really do want you folks here in person. We want to encourage that because that's where we're going to get the best learning interaction. And we know that you're paying attention. So yeah, I do want to introduce my team that have helped put this all together. I have Evan Means back there, Sema Bulhab, and Lincoln Edwards. And then Patty Gano had already introduced herself. So please help yourself to coffee and sugary treats, and I will hand it over to our facilitators who have put together a really fantastic program. I hope you learn a lot. Please stay informed. If you're not already on the email list, sign up. We'll send some follow-up emails of this as well. And we're going to just continue to learn and empower communities and give you that educational knowledge so that you can take this back to your communities and increase accessibility. So thank you all for being here.
As Jamie mentioned, this is our second module training that we've offered. In the month of January, we offered training that was solely dedicated to sort of the big picture of ADA Title II. Today is all about the role of the ADA coordinator. And as the ADA coordinator wears a lot of different hats and sort of how to best wear those hats and help the community. I've already introduced myself, but also with us today is Jim DeYoung. Jim DeYoung is the former director of the Great Plains ADA Center. One of, I think, his best claims to fame is he created the ADA National Symposium along with his team and really the ADA coordinator training program. Very intensive. You have to get like 30 credit hours over 2 years. And it covers everything in the world of ADA coordinators. So if anybody would ever be interested in that, we will put that out. I'll link to it out on CMAP's website. Feel free to reach out to Jim. But it really is a good way to sort of learn about everything that goes into the life of being an ADA coordinator. Kind of our goals for today, first and foremost, is understanding those obligations of an ADA coordinator. Next up is, we're going to spend a little bit but maybe your community's looking at sort of, is there a different person that might be the right selection? So we are going to spend a little bit of time on sort of where we've seen successes and where we've seen challenges in the world of ADA coordinators, the roles and responsibilities of that coordinator. The most important thing you guys need to know is all these roles and responsibilities do not fall on the ADA coordinator. A lot of the times you are a clearinghouse more than you are the only person who is responsible for that operation. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on developing that internal support system. Whenever there's a question that you can't answer, is the whole community ready to support you in finding the answer to that question? And lastly, we're just going to give you a bunch of resources. This is all going to be put out on CMAP's website. This presentation has links to every single resource. So don't feel like you need to write down the resources or anything like that today, because it's all going to be available for links put on CMAP's website after the fact. First things first, obligation of Title II entities. For those of you who may not know, just to go back for a second, there's 5 different titles under the ADA. Title I is employment. That also impacts the municipalities, but a lot of times that's covered by a different department than the ADA coordinator. So we aren't going to spend a lot of time on employment today, but just know that there's a lot of crossover in the world of employment and the world of ADA. The reason we're all here today is Title II. That's the state and local governmental entities. That's your park districts, that's your library districts, your communities, your counties, all that sort of falls under the local and state government services. Title III are businesses that are open to the public. Your McDonald's, your Walgreens, your shopping centers, all those businesses of that nature have their own separate requirements under Title III. Title IV is telecommunications, and Title V is sort of the catch-all for everything else. So with Title II, this is really sort of where all 4 of these modules come together, is under Title II. So conduct an ADA self-evaluation is one of those requirements. On April 18th, we're going to be spending 4 hours just in the world of self-evaluation. The various ways you can do a self-evaluation, the pros and cons, things to think about of that nature. So if you're really interested,
It's going well. I'm trying to do ADA and CIP. Where we're going.
provide public notice about the, that is a requirement. If your community does not have one of those, please.
Correct.
And you can get your notice to them. Designate an employee to oversee Title II compliance. This is that role that is named ADA coordinator. But whenever you're named ADA coordinator, you're also if the Department of Justice ever shows up about your city meetings, they're going to come to you first because you are the ADA coordinator. So even though you aren't overseeing all these different departments, you are really that public face for the ADA within your community. Establish a grievance procedure. This was also covered in that first module. If anybody has a question about that, please feel free to ask. Again, that is a pre-made form by the Department of Justice in which you just add your own information to it and you guys have yourself a grievance procedure. Lastly, develop a transition plan. April 19th is when we're going to spend 4 hours just on developing an ADA transition. So April 18th and 19th are going to be those ones that are really focused on the self-evaluation and the development of the transition plan. Today is all about the role of the ADA coordinator. Job description. So an ADA coordinator is a title that sort of the community has taken to using. It's not the only title that exists. It could be director of ADA compliance. It could be, ADA compliance manager, disability coordinator. There's no magical title for what it has to be. The thing I really like about ADA coordinator is that you are there to coordinate access between the community and between the residents of that community. You're not there for compliance. You're there to coordinate that access. It should be directly employed by the municipality. Does anyone here, are they a municipality whose ADA coordinator is not a full-time employee of that community? Good. It exists. We've seen it before. And the challenge there is just when you have a consultant who's being your ADA coordinator, they can never know enough about your community to serve that role. So if that's ever a conversation that comes up of like, hey, can we hand this? Advise against it, because when the Department of Justice shows up at your door one day, God willing, it never happens. You don't want your first answer to be, hold on, let me call my consultant. You're much better off to say, well, Bob in Public Works is our ADA coordinator. He can come down and meet you. Existing employee versus a new hire. I think this is another sort of common misconception. ADA coordinator does not have to be a full-time role, especially for smaller communities. It can never be a full-time. So for like Cook County in that example, that you probably do have a full-time, you're probably looking for a full-time ADA coordinator, am I correct in stating that?
It's more complex than that. Besides, that was actually a question I was going to get asked. I'm the SNE for the professional aspects of operational side at our user agencies. So, for example, the county sheriff has an ADA board, lots of chief judges. They deal on the operational side. I deal with the district side. So it's a little more complex. We all end up talking to the same kind of lawyers, but
Yeah, so as you county, they have a very clear process. For it could be that the city clerk is also the ADA coordinator, and that's one of 4 roles that he does. on a daily basis. So it's really important that the ADA coordinator fit your community. I forgot to say this in the beginning. Please interrupt me. I honestly have no desire to talk for like 3 straight hours. This is not a structured class. This is very much a question and answer class, is how this is intended to be. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, ask that question. I always encourage people, if you think it might be a silly question, I guarantee you it's not, because there's probably 9 other people in here thinking the exact same question, and they're wondering if it's a silly question. So any questions that you might have, this is your opportunity to ask those questions. Otherwise, I guarantee you will get tired of hearing me talk. Well, either that or I'm gonna get. The question I would ask you is, does the community know that you are the ADA coordinator? How have you gotten your name out to the community that you are the person to call? Is it on the website? Is it on, whenever you send out, say, a meeting agenda for your council meeting? Does that agenda say, if you need assistance, who should you call? Because what we found is that if the people don't know who to call, who they might call is their alderman, the mayor, someone like that, and then they're not going to know the answer, and then it turns into a whole situation. It's much better off to just start off with, if you need anything related in the world of ADA, call me and I can help you. So if that's something that's not on your city's website, I would encourage you to add that to your website. You know, you can add a little ADA tab, and it can be just as if you need any assistance with the ADA, please call Bob at Public Works, and he can be the first person. Name and title, mailing address, phone number, email address. One thing that we see a lot is that a lot of communities will create an email address that's like ADA coordinator at village of, because it changes. People move, people go different places. That's fine, as long as whenever that person leaves, you guys have a system in place as to who's going to take over that email.
I'm home, sweetheart.
Maintaining ADA coordinator appropriate documents. This is another thing that we found as we help communities. It's the day we leave, everything looks great. We'll come back 2 years later and that person left and never been updated. So I would encourage you guys to have a process of, if the ADA coordinator ever leaves, what's the process of assigning the next one? I will ask you guys, for those of you that are ADA coordinators, have you guys been officially designated as the ADA coordinator by your community? Does anyone know? No? Has anyone not been designated as the official ADA coordinator by your community? I would encourage you guys to get officially designated.
I don't have a microphone, but I think you can hear me okay, which is it's very important, you know, for the public, not only the public to know, but as well outside agencies that might be contacting you to find out information, they need to know that as well. So particularly important in that manner.
Yeah, so if you aren't the official, it's pretty much can just be done by decree, or it can be added to the official role of what you're doing. But it is really important that you are officially named by that community as the ADA coordinator.
If I could add, it's one of the questions, if the Department of Justice, as he's saying, we're coming in to look at a violation, it is one of the questions they will ask right away. We've been involved with several communities that have had DOJ visit them, and consistently, that was one of the questions, was this position codified within the municipality or not? Or was it just considered rather than officially documented?
So identifying the right candidate, as I think we heard during the introductions, there's people who do all kinds of different jobs within the community. There is no right candidate. What there does need to be is that you have to have the ability to make decisions. If you don't have decision-making power within your community, you might not be the right candidate to be ADA coordinator. It's you have to have that ability of, if someone calls you with a need, you can provide an answer back to them. It doesn't mean that you have the final decision-making power, but you do need to have some decision-making power within your community. Even if all that is, even if your only decision-making power is as ADA coordinator, then that's where I think it's important to codify that the ADA coordinator has the ability to make decisions regarding the ADA. Time commitment. Time commitment varies based on the community, but this is going to take some time. So it's important that the bosses, the higher ups, the hierarchy knows that whenever you take on the role of ADA coordinator, that is a role that you are going to have to serve. The joke at the ADA symposium for years was the ADA coordinator was the person who missed the ADA coordinator meeting. There was a citywide meeting. People asked for hands of who wants to be ADA coordinator. Whoever wasn't there ended up being the ADA coordinator. I think most communities have learned now that it's not the best way to do it, but there is a time commitment that goes along with it. Really sort of the main thing that we put forward with ADA coordinator is that people first attitude. If someone's calling you, they're calling you because they need help. So it's identifying that person who is going to be able to answer the phone, who's going to respond to emails quickly, who has that ability to coordinate both internally and with the disability community. Because if that first interaction is positive, that goes a long way to sort of defusing the situation. Because most of the time, whenever someone calls the ADA coordinator, it's because they have a problem. You don't get a lot of calls to the ADA coordinator. It's like, I just wanted to see how your day's. Mostly it's, I tried to get here and I couldn't get here. What's the city going to do about it? And why didn't you do it 2 weeks? You know, that's about creating that record that if there ever is a complaint against the community, you can go back and say, this is what we did. This is how we did it. It might not be exactly what the person wanted, but this is what we could do at that time. Organizational community and communication skills. Biggest thing I'll say is that willingness to learn. I don't think you get a lot of ADA coordinators who are experts on the ADA on their very first. The big thing is, do you have that willingness to go out and gain more knowledge? Do you have the ability to know what you don't know? We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that as well. There's nothing wrong with saying, I can't answer that question. Give me a week. Let me go back and talk to my team, and then we'll come back to you with an answer. I think the worst thing that we can do is provide an answer when we're not sure it's the right answer. There's nothing wrong with just saying, I think I know the answer, but let me go back and look before I give you an answer. Follow up on issues. Again, being the ADA coordinator is all about getting the resolution. I don't think anybody here is an equal employment opportunity officer. If that's correct, I might offend you here, but I think we recommend that not be your ADA. And the reason for that is sort of this graphic here. The ADA coordinator sort of balances a line between the disability advocate and the compliance manager. And really what we like to focus on is that disability advocate side. There is a compliance side to this. There is a legal requirement side to this. But at the end of the day, what our role as ADA coordinators really is to help our community. And we think that's where sort of the equal employment officer can become an issue at times, is that their primary responsibility is to make sure that the city is in good legal standing. That's their job. That's what they're responsible for. But really, this goes beyond good legal standing and moves on to how can we help our communities. Full-time candidate, potential candidates, really anybody could be a good candidate for this. Public works staff, building staff, clerk staff, deputy city administrators. City attorney can even be a viable candidate. If that city attorney is a full-time employee of the city, that's really where we found the issue with consultants is they use a third-party attorney and they make their third-party attorney the ADA coordinator. So if you do have a full-time attorney, that is a viable option. Community relations, human resources. I think the big thing here is that there's no wrong department to serve as the ADA coordinator. It's more important that the right person be the ADA coordinator. We're going to move on to qualifications now, so just wanted to take a second to see if anybody had any questions before we move on to the next section here.
Coordinator's more of a managerial, not a technical.
It could be a technical type person, but that technical type person is going to end up doing some managerial work. Because the challenge of the technical type person is they're very strong in their field, but there's going to be some ADA coordinator calls that come in that don't involve them. So at that time, then it's delegating that out to somebody else to assist you with that. Because I'll say, you know, if there's a ADA complaint related to the police department, I don't think any of us are necessarily prepared to answer that question. So that's whenever you reach into the police department and who's your contact at the police department, and then they address it, and you follow up with them and say, what was the solution? So yeah, it certainly could be a technical person, but it's got to be a technical person who's comfortable going to other departments, coordinating with them. Anybody have any other questions before we move?
It's not so much the level of organization you're at, it's the.
Exactly. Oh, sorry about that. So the question was related to an ADA coordinator, whether that's more of a manager position or whether that could be more of a technical position. And I think the answer is it could be a technical position as long as that person is comfortable coordinating with other people. And I will say that as part of the grievance procedure, there is a next step up if that grievance isn't addressed. So that's where like the deputy city administrator could be that person, because if the person filing the grievance doesn't agree with that decision, then there is another rung on the ladder to move up to. Does anybody have any other questions? Not seeing any. Moving on to qualifications. We'll hit on this again. It's that willingness to develop comprehensive knowledge. Unless you are a very large government entity, odds are you are not going to find someone who has all that knowledge the very first day. The big thing is that it's someone who is willing to develop that knowledge over time. So if we go through this today and you say, I'm not qualified to be ADA coordinator, I guarantee that you're qualified to be ADA coordinator as long as you're willing to continue to develop that knowledge over time. Knowledge of related applicable disability laws. Again, you'll develop that throughout your career as the ADA coordinator. Really what that comes down to is federal and state don't always match up with each other. Illinois has the Illinois Accessibility Code, which in some cases just doesn't really jive with the federal standards. You know, that's just the world that we live in. The most stringent rule applies. So unlike a lot of other situations in which whatever the federal government says is sort of the guiding factor, the ADA does allow federal and even local. If you guys as local agencies want stricter ADA requirements, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. The federal government says that that's completely acceptable. You can't be less compliant. You can always be more compliant. I think a good example of this on the public works side is for curb ramps, the federal government is at 1 in 12 running. There's some communities who feel that 1 in 12 is a little too steep, so they might go to, say, like a 1 in 16 running. That's perfectly acceptable because the federal government does allow you to have stricter standards if you so desire. Really, to me, this is the more important part of being the ADA standard, and that's knowing your knowing the programs, the services, who those point people are within your community, and sort of having that knowledge. And if you're the ADA coordinator today and you don't have that knowledge, I'd encourage you to go out and develop that knowledge. To learn who your person is in the city clerk's office, who, if you have a question, you know this is the person that you're gonna reach out to. If you're in the city clerk's office, if someone calls with a complaint about a sidewalk, who do you call in public works? So that you can really help guide the people with the questions to get them the quickest possible answers. And it's that ability to coordinate. Again, you don't need to know the answer to every single question. What I think the ADA coordinator does need to know is that who in the city can help them get the answer to that question. You are a disability. And I think that's a really important thing to know as the role of the ADA. You are the voice for the disability community within your community government. You know, whenever a new project's happening, you are the person who asks, hold on, guys, is this ADA compliant? Like, you know, if you're building a new city hall, you're the person who asks that question, okay, does this meet all the ADA standards? You know, you are the representative for the disability community within this community. And as that, I would encourage you to go out and get to know your disability. I think what you'll find if you haven't gone out and got to know them is that the community is a lot bigger than you realize that it is. There's a lot more people in your community who have disabilities than you would even realize. The number now is like 1 in 5. So yeah, the current number is 1 in 5 either has a disability, and the number grows amongst the people who are related to the disability.
1 in 4 households.
So if you think about it, if you have a child with a disability, that impacts the parents, the grandparents, the older siblings. The community is a lot bigger than you realize that it is. And if you don't currently know that community, I would encourage you to get out and get to know that community. We have some resources at the end of sort of various disability advocacy groups throughout the region, and really just start to develop that relationship, because they are very, very willing. They have been waiting for their voice to be heard for a long time. So if you go out and reach out to them, you will get people who are very interested in partnering with you. You'll get people who are very invested in partnering with you. And if there ever is a complaint that comes against the community, they will stand behind you. They will say, I've worked with this community and they are trying. They might not be there yet, but if you can have those community here, city departments over here, you are the person who stands in the middle of those two groups. And I think that's really sort of the unique nature of the ADA coordinator, in which you are obviously a government employee and you work for your local government, but you are advocating for the disability community within your government. Roles and responsibilities. I think it's really important. I cannot give you a list of everything that the ADA coordinator does, because it varies based on the community. There is no one-size-fits-all model to the ADA coordinator. The big thing is you oversee all aspects of ADA within your community. I'll throw this out here because this is the #1 lawsuit ADA-wise in the country right now, is website accessibility. So if no one in your community has ever asked your web developers, is my website accessible? I think today or tomorrow is probably the day to ask that question. Because, and I don't know what the exact, Jim, do you know what the numbers are lawsuit wise on that?
Oh, no, but
It is a lot. It is. And I think that's where it's not necessarily important that you solve But that's where it's really helpful to have the ADA coordinator's name on the website. And you can say, we're in the process of transitioning our website. If you need anything, call.
If I, and you might have to repeat this for those online, but one of the things we have experienced a great deal in working with community is you might have 5 or 6 people that have access to that website to be able to do modifications or adjustment, yet they don't have training and accessibility. And so the requirement, obviously, within that particular community would be anyone who has access to doing anything to the website needs to be very aware of the accessibility requirements. A quick example would be if you think of a picture. Sorry, on your side. If you think of a picture, that can be made so that it will articulate what that picture is to an individual who is visually impaired, as an example. And so there's various other things that you need to learn in making a website accessible. Anybody who has access within your community should go through such training. And there's key points we, I think, referenced for you at the end of this training.
Yes, sir.
I got a couple for you. For work, we use Civic Plus as like a web hosting agent and rely on them a lot for making sure our website is ADA compliant, that sort of thing. But it's something I've attempted. I don't personally know a ton about all the digital requirements related to ADA, but I know enough about it to know it's really. So it's a lot of it is new and like that. Like how is that being legislated? Because it's like it's kind of it's not like new. A lot of it's been around for like a decade, but like a lot of stuff in closed captioning that is developing year over year and improve. Like, how is that being handled with litigation and stuff? Like, what are the outcomes of lawsuits related to that?
If I could,
Sorry, I know that was a lot.
no, that's great. And Jamie, maybe you can come up here and answer the question regarding CMAP providing any training in that particular area. So I'll leave that one for a second, but let me address your second part. Your second part, I worked for a university for 30 years. And one of the great difficulties there was just what you're indicating too.
I came from a community college, and that's what prior to the city I worked for, and that's where I gained a lot of this knowledge.
What he stated was he worked for a community college where a lot of this came up. And it clearly does, as you're buying software programs in particular departments to work with those. One of the things the university finally had to go to strong language to say that this must meet the latest ADA guidelines and be accessible to the disability community, or you're in fault of this contract. And so once they did that, then there started to be a big change in what we started to see coming into the university. And so we found that in the contract language is so important to be able to really put that in there strongly, if you will. And yes, it is evolving. We don't want to, construction's evolving also. It's not the only thing evolving. And so there is a manner of keeping up to it, but if you don't mind, I'll use Kansas City as an example right now. A community I worked with at length, and they were under a Department of Justice order to come into greater compliance. And the main thing they were looking for, are you taking the good faith effort steps to get there? Did you just close the door on accessibility to your websites and say, that's too difficult, sorry, not doing that? Obviously, you're gonna have a problem. But if you said, well, we've been through 101 and we're registered for 202, if you will, that's a good faith effort. And you're gonna hear that consistently this morning or through our trainings is what the Department of Justice is looking for is that good faith effort. They don't expect anybody to be 100% compliance, even 30 years after the ADA. They're looking for that good faith effort to get to that point while recognizing I was a member of a task force that helped develop the ADA in Congress and move it through Congress. There was no internet at that time. There wasn't webmail. There wasn't anything of that nature. So that's evolved the ADA, particularly when they revised the ADA in 2008. And so you started to see the acknowledgement of the electronic world. And so that's even evolving on the federal level at this time. But what DOJ is particularly looking for, again, you just shut the door and say too complicated or not my problem, rather than we took step one, step two, we're moving on to 3 and 4. With the input, as Travis pointed out before too, of your advisory committee, we have the input from that advisory committee too, helping us see if our standards are acceptable to the community or not. Does that help? David, did you want
I'll talk to that,
to?
Jim.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we don't necessarily have specific training set for that now, but as Jamie mentioned, this is a long-term commitment that CMAP is looking at. Jamie, if I misspeak to you, please correct me. So I think it's based on the feedback that we get from this. I think we're open to looking at whatever training meets the needs of the community. You know, this is step one for CMAP too. There's gonna be a step 2, a step 3, a step 4. So I would encourage you guys to, we'll have a survey at the end of this. If there's more information that you want to know about, that will be part of what the future of this training looks like. Jamie, did I just cover?
Yes, and then, CNAP is really gonna be a depository for a lot of resources. As far as we know, IDOT is also starting, ADA training. So we're gonna learn details about that and make sure to send it out to folks. But like Travis mentioned, this is an iterative process, and so as we hear back from you all about what your needs are, we'll continue to cater and evolve and revise the trainings to ensure that they meet the needs of patients.
I'll go to the gentleman in the back.
So kind of a different perspective. We had a consultant who helped bring us out of the dark ages of the clients. And he kept feeding it into my brain and other departments. That when you have a vendor, you can't assign blame to the vendor if your website's not compliant. You can't say, well, our vendor's handling that, but you're still responsible for that. That's probably the hardest thing for our department is to raise the stuff. Well, but we hired them to that, but it's still on our property, it's still all of that. So that's pretty accurate.
Yes, absolutely. The gentleman in the back works for Cook County Forest Preserve, and what he mentioned is going through their process. One of the main things that they learned is that you can't put your compliance on a third-party source. And that goes for everything in your community. That's for the software, that's for the festivals. We're gonna spend an example talking about festivals. If someone hosts a festival in your city park, if it's not compliant, you could be part of that complaint. Because you can't,
Contract away your obligation.
yes, you cannot contract away your obligation. That's the wording within the ADA, is that a community cannot contract away the obligation. Ultimately, the obligation lies with them. Question in front?
Well, I was gonna make a point, with the Village of Burr Ridge, we just went through we just went from WordPress, now we're using, Revise, the website, and the point that we had put it into the contract, and all of our website, we still got a bunch of vendors that came in, I think there was plus one of them, and we chose Revise, but all of them are now offering training on this and doing ADA compliance. So really the best thing at the Village right now is actually our website.
Question lies with them. Question in front?
Well, I was gonna make a point, with the Village of Burr Ridge, we just went from WordPress, now we're using, Revise, the website, and the point that we had put it into the contract, and all of our website, we still got a bunch of vendors that came in, I think there was plus one of them, and we chose Revise, but all of them are now offering training on this and doing ADA compliance. So really the best thing at the Village right now is actually our website, because I sat in a class, I put things on the website, it was a 4-hour class, and basically every time the instructor was telling us something, she goes, now remember, you have to do this for the ADA, and the alt text, that's actually probably what kicked us off. That's why I'm here actually at the moment, that probably kicked us off a little bit. So if I it's not really, if you're worried about narrowing companies that might respond to your bid, RFPs, I wouldn't worry about it, because all the major players out there, they will. Standard. But they're all doing that now with Web3 and all that.
The gentleman at Burr Ridge mentioned that they had recently gone through this process and just sort of the reassurance that the web developers are up to speed on this and that it's not going to impact the RFP. Still get a strong response from vendors, even if you are going to require accessibility. And I think that sort of close that is, if you already have a website, it's going to be a process of how you can do it. But I think, as Jim mentioned, it's those small steps that are going to count. I don't think anybody expects you guys to go from non-compliant to compliant. What it is it's that good faith effort, the steps. It's, if someone calls with a complaint, that'll be the first one thing that's done. If someone says, I went to pay my water bill and I couldn't do that, low vision, then that's a great place to start. So I think it's listening to your community, working at it over time, and when you guys do that full web page redevelopment, then really, that's whenever you're going to require more quicker. Steve, I guess, ma'am, does that answer sort of your initial comment? Good to go? Yes. Okay, good deal. No, fantastic. Yeah, and I think that's, whenever we started working on this with CMAP, we did the training for what we thought made the most sense, but I don't think we're here to say that we understand all the training you guys need. So as this goes on, engage with us and tell us what you think would be most helpful for you. Create an internal communication process for all affected persons and departments. If you look at the 8.5 by 11 sheet that is in front of you, to me, this is a great start. In which, as the ADA coordinator, if anybody didn't get handouts, if you can raise your hand. I think we caught everybody. I think this is a great place to start. This is in which you can write down, if I have a question for the fire department, who do I call in the fire department? If I have a question at engineering, who do I call in engineering? And odds are you're going to use this one time a year. So I think you can fill it out, put it in your desk. But that one time a year that you need to use it, it's going to be really helpful. So I would encourage you guys to have that conversation with the other departments for who those contact and coordination people are going to be. Establish, publicize, follow-up, document the grievance procedure process. Does anybody here know specifically that they don't have a grievance procedure for their? Don't have it.
Might not want to.
Yeah, no, I think if you get nothing out of today, I would encourage you guys to get that grievance procedure up and running. That is the best first step I can leave you guys with today.
And let the public know.
Yeah. And let the public know about it. I think that is a good first step. I think it's a quick document that if anybody needs a link to where that's out on the Department of Justice website, we can certainly get that for you. And yeah, it is. They give you all the wording that you need. You just have to type in your. So if anybody needs that, I have some business cards on me, or there's links on CMAP to reach out to CMAP as well. Create and maintain a documentation process for all ADA implementations. To me, this is the exciting part of the job. I think it's really important. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about when the people are complaining. I also think it's really important to document all the good things that you're doing. So whenever someone comes to you and says, what is the village of Burr Ridge doing about the ADA? You can say, well, in the past year, we've done 20 curb ramps, 2 miles of sidewalk. We made renovations to our city hall. We're going to do the parking lot next year. I think it's really important that whenever someone comes to you and says, why aren't you doing more? To have that ability to say, well, we are doing all this work. But it takes time. We all acknowledge that this is going to take time. But celebrate those successes as much as you're going to deal with the potential failures that your community has. Grievance procedure flow chart. This is the 11 by 17 document. So I will say that the days listed on here are the standard Department of Justice days. You guys could have your own grievance procedures that change the timeline of this a little bit. But I think this is another good sort of item that you can keep, in which if someone does call up a grievance, it really is just going through the process. It all starts with a complaint being received. I think, and this is where building those liaison groups is gonna be important, is not every complaint is gonna be received by the ADA coordinator. If a complaint comes into Public Works, that's still a valid complaint against, that's a grievance against the community. So they need to be able to follow this process. If a complaint comes into the traffic compliance judge, that's still a complaint against the community. So I think that's sort of the big first hurdle to get over on this, is that as the ADA coordinator, you don't need to address every complaint that comes in the door, but it is really important that you know when complaints do come in. Basically, the way the Department of Justice lays it out is that you have 15 days to respond to that complaint. It could be phone, it could be email, it could be an in-person meeting. There's no set way that you have to respond to that complaint, but you do have 15 days to respond to that. And really what you're doing there is you're getting more information. They fill out a little one-page form. You don't know what they actually. So the goal during that initial meeting is to learn what the actual complaint is and what the public is looking for in that. After that, you have 15 days to respond in writing as to what the community is going to do about it. And I'll tell you this, the answer is not always yes. The answer doesn't always have to be yes. You know, if someone wants to reconstruct 5 miles of sidewalk so they can walk to the grocery store, you can't do that in a month. You know, that's not a feasible solution. But so the answer isn't always yes, but you do need to respond in writing. And I think that's the key thing to remember there is offer options for a substantive resolution. That resolution might be a couple of years away. It might be an alternative that they didn't even think about. But it is important that you offer some resolution to that. If the complainant agrees with it, fantastic. Do the resolution, file it for 3 years. Biggest thing there is you need to keep it on record for 3 years. 3 years is the magic timeline for keeping any ADA minimum. Question, sir?
You have these big box stores, management companies run these malls. And not from the bottom. All of a sudden, you're thrown in the middle of this.
So just to sort of
You understand?
just to sort of clarify the question, you have a big box store in your community.
Yes.
There's a complaint against that big box store
The management.
or the
company.
management company who's responsible for that private property. And then your community gets brought into that complaint?
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
And it wasn't, they didn't take care of it. They didn't address the issue in a reasonable time.
Okay, the question, did you already feed it in?
I did not.
The question being, if you have a big box store in your community, and there's an issue there, what do you do as the community? How are you informed? First of all, that is not your responsibility, okay? That's a Title III issue. And so I'm gonna just mention a company, I'm sorry, because I don't like them, Walmart, and so you've got an issue with them. Well, basically because of their owner and taking the football team to Los Angeles. So we don't like them down south. But the point being that then is not something you have to keep catalog. If though that involved, for instance, some sort of city ordinance that they then violated, and you didn't do anything about it, now there could be a grievance presented to the community saying, wait a minute, you just turned a blind eye to this issue. You can't do that. I'm not able to get in the store. Or there's not adequate parking there. Or when I come in with my service animal, they tell me I can't bring the animal in. And you have that clear in the ordinance to be able to do business in your community. They have to follow the following rules for compliance, not only with the ADA, but with other civil rights laws. Then you come in as a player. Okay, other than that, if it's just strictly me versus that company, that's not your involvement.
Yes, sir.
At the Will County Highway Department, we have a
our policy for, I just deal with the accessibility in the right of way, sidewalks, ramps, and 96% of those facilities are not technically owned by county highway department. They're in their per intergovernmental agreement with either an agency or a municipality, and the ultimate ability is for them to operate. What type of responsibility does the county have if there is, you know, I get agreements that there's something wrong with a curb ramp, and I forward that on to the community, and if he doesn't address it, does it ultimately fall back onto the county for bringing it in compliance? Or, you know, it's kind of a gray area.
Yeah, and I think how, I don't know the exact, I can't give you what the official legal answer is, but the way I would treat this is at that point, the community is almost a third party vendor for you. So I think it could ultimately, you'll be lumped into it. But it is ultimately on that community to take care of their. So my feeling is most likely it'll fall in that community, but the odds of you being dragged along for that process is very, very high. If that makes sense.
That's what I figured. I just want to know.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing there is you guys have agreements with the communities that. How does that process work in which do they get to decide if they're gonna fix that issue on your right of way? So how are those agreements set up today?
It falls into that, you know, if they're doing a program that's responsible for, they, you know, they go off to the edge of the county highway, responsible for upgrading the ramps. On the flip side, also the chagrin of construction engineer, now we're taking on the responsibility to make sure that the ramps come into compliance with. We are going to be in place in communities for that work, and I haven't had to kick back that at all, but that's kind of how we're handling it right now. But we have that scenario where.
And I think obviously since you guys are doing the construction, you guys are responsible for making sure that construction is compliant before it gets handed back over to the community. So that to me, that's clearly your county's responsibility.
And that's what we're doing for what we're doing our.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Side. That's kind of what we, again, if it's one issue like a sidewalk, where generally unless it's, over that sidewalk.
I would agree with that. I'd have to look through the official agreements to know exactly what the situation is. The one thing I will say is if you can easily fix the problem, it's sometimes just easier to just not. Now, whether that messes up your agreements, et cetera, I don't necessarily know, but the best solution is always just to take care of the problem and to not rely on those agreements to get out of sort of a future complaint.
You know, but no, if it's something like that, yeah, but if you're talking like Oregon. And oh, yes. And depending on each municipality and what their contract is with IDOT, you know, that can be a lot different too. I've worked for a few different municipalities, and each one is, you know, very different. They don't always get updated, so it's very circumstantial.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is just IDOT has a statewide system. You have your local focus. Just sort of keep you at top. So, very good comments. Any other questions, comments before we move on? I do think we are going to take a break to pass it on the microphone. Just I think it'll help the virtual. Flowchart wise, if the complainant is not satisfied, that triggers another calendar. So at that point, you have 15 days for a high level official to meet with that person. This will be laid out in your grievance procedure. Could be the city administrator, could be the public director of public works, could be the mayor, but it's a high level official goes out and meets with them. You have 15 days to respond in writing as to what that final solution is, and then you complete those options. And at that point, that's sort of the end of the grievance procedure process. Yes, sir. Oh, hey, can you hold on 1 second?
Is there a definition of what a high level official is? I mean, is that something we determine by internally?
Yes.
Okay.
And the big thing is, it's someone who has the ultimate, typically what I recommend is the ultimate decision making. Whoever is sort of the final say within the community is that high level official. The reason they say high level official is sometimes the mayor is that final say, sometimes the city administrator is the final say, sometimes the CEO is the final say. So they don't really define who it is, but I would say whoever is the final voice in your community is that high level official. Next up, we are going to move on to a bunch of examples, but it is 10:10. So I'm going to call a bit of an audible here. And we're going to take a 15-minute break. Again, restrooms are right whenever you walk in the door. You know, feel free. We will restart at 10:25.
Add one point if you would,
Oh.
add it in there.
Before we go to break, we're going to add one more point.
The important thing is we're looking at documentation of these things occurring. There has to be a repository of where it's kept in one place. So you don't have it in 9 different departments and suddenly you have a complaint and somebody said, well, wait a minute, I know there's something over in public works. I know there's something there. It needs to be copied and collected all in one area. I think of it as like an insurance policy and your insurance, and you keep that all in one folder. And that's the same thing we recommend with all your actions under the ADA. They get copied and at least kept generally by the ADA coordinator, but at least a copy all in one place. Take a break, sorry.
For those virtual, we will restart at 10:25. Thank you.
Okay, I have no idea what stop recording and recording.
That's not you, is it?
No, I'm not clicking anything. It just stops and starts.
I have no idea. I got that
So the
far. I
Wi-Fi
never
is
ran it.
great.
Okay, is that why it's cutting in and out?
Someone's at the office
Okay.
recording it now.
Okay.
So from a stable Wi-Fi connection, so we made him a host.
Yeah.
So it should be.
Okay, great. Yeah, because I'm like, I'm not clicking anything, just going. I'm like, I don't know. Yeah, I've been keeping up. They were asking about a permanent recording. It says they'll be up on CMAP's website as it is. Understand.
For sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm asking if they can hear any of the questions being asked right now. They say that it depends on who's talking at the moment, but I'll try to do my best to cyber in what they're asking.
Yeah. And
A coordinator training through the University of Missouri that is available nationwide. So if anybody would be interested in doing it, it's offered through the University of Missouri because there's 12 ADA networks.
Yeah.
So 10 ADA networks throughout the country. One of them is located at the University of Missouri, and sort of one of their primary focus is the world of training. So the only reason it's offered by the University of Missouri is just because that's where that federally funded ADA center is located. So if anybody's interested in that, it's open to people all throughout the country. And it's a fairly minimal cost. So we talked about the grievance procedure a little bit. We are now going to go through sort of some practical examples of what this grievance procedure process looks like. There's a lot of wording on this, so I'm just going to read it off for everybody. Zoning Commission hosts a monthly meeting in the council chambers. The meeting includes a public meeting on a proposed redevelopment. A deaf individual comes to the meeting for the purpose of providing public comment. A sign language interpreter is not available. The resident leaves the meeting without providing a comment. The resident calls you and says, I would like to file a complaint. So, first question is, the complainant choosing to come to the city is the best possible scenario in this situation. Because who else could they call? Media, attorneys, anybody else? DOJ, Illinois Attorney General's office. They could call everybody. So the important thing to note here is they are not obligated to come to you first. Other options, U.S. Justice Department, Illinois District Court, lawyer, all are acceptable options. So there is no obligation for them to come to you first. So it's really important to remember, whenever they reach out to the city first, that is the best possible scenario in this situation. Because we don't want to get those other four involved, correct? Best case scenario, those other four do not know that we exist. That's kind of our goal. So if someone calls you with a complaint, that's a good thing. Moving on, what are your follow-up actions? First things first, reach out to the complainant to gather information. What does reaching out to them look like? If possible, I'm always a phone in-person meeting kind of person. Emails are misconstrued. Like it or not, I would love to do emails. I'm not a big call person. I would prefer to sit behind my desk all day if I possibly could, but everyday emails get misconstrued. So you can have the best possible intentions, but if they misread that email, who could they call? Attorney General, Justice Department, blah, blah, blah. So sometimes email is your only option. If you can reach out to them in person, please reach out to them in person. Coordinate with city staff to gather information. Can anybody think of who the city staff that we probably need to talk to in this case are? Who hosted the meeting? So whoever hosted the meeting, odds are they probably don't even know that they could need a sign language interpreter. The person left that meeting. They probably aren't aware that they even exist. So educate and support. The goal here is not to punish. The goal here is not to say that you did it wrong. The goal here is to say, next time, include this language. And this is really the kind of the main thing that we push, is to reach out to that complainant to explain the resolution. The resolution in this case is most likely, we are going to include on every single meeting minutes, if you need a sign language interpreter, call this person. Maybe it's a case in which they can add their testimony later. That's going to be based on your community, but if you can add their testimony later, that'd be a great thing to do. Respond in writing, email, letter, whatever your process is for doing this. It is really important that you respond in writing because you're going to save that piece of paper. That is your actual record piece of paper. Because you're not going to remember 2 years from now, whenever a lawyer shows up at your door and asks, well, whenever Miss Mary showed up, she didn't have a sign language interpreter. What did you do about it? Your response is going to be, what are you talking about? So pull out your piece of paper and say, oh, I talked to her. This was the agreement we made. Let me show you all our meeting minutes since then. We have our sign language interpreter. We did what we said we were going to do. So that's those substantive resolutions, and ultimately it's about following. If you're going to put a solution on paper, you better do that solution. Like that's one of the strongest advices I'll give in this is, if you are going to state that you're going to do something, do it. Recommendation, all public meetings should include a footnote of the ADA notice. Does anybody currently do this on all their public meetings? Fantastic. What we recommend for communities is you guys have your standard footnote that everything, your header footer for everything that you guys send out. I would add a sentence at the bottom of it that simply says, if you require any accommodations, please call this person or email them at X at least 14 days prior to the event. And that is just, that's the standard document that is, anytime anything goes out in your community, that's on that piece of paper. Because what's gonna happen is, we worked with a community and they did that for their council minutes, for their council agendas. But the zoning department sent out the zoning agendas. The city council people never told the zoning department that they needed to have this on their thing. So now, so then they had a follow-up complaint as to why aren't you doing this for zoning? And the answer is they just never talked to each other. It was a larger community, they were in different locations, they just never talked to each other. So this is where, if you can get this as a standard across the board, then you don't have to worry about this. And this is a really easy solution that, imagine you are deaf, you go to talk at a city council meeting about something you don't support, and you don't get a talk. You know, think about how we're gonna feel. We're gonna be upset, right? So these, anytime someone's upset, these are the people who have that likelihood of reaching out to other parties. So this is a really easy solution that can fix a lot of potential problems in the future. At the end of the day, complete whatever you said you're gonna do. As Jim mentioned, hold on to this for at least 3 years. Provide continuing education for city staff. This is another thing that I thought I did a really good job training the ADA coordinator. They left 2 months later. They took another job. Now I have a completely untrained ADA coordinator. So what's that transition process for ADA accessibility within your city? Who's gonna pass on that knowledge? And who's gonna continue to educate? Because at the end of the day, one of your goals as ADA coordinator is education. You are gonna be providing that education to the city staff on interacting with the disability community. Any questions on sort of public meetings and that sort of world of the ADA? Yes, sir. You can hold on 1 second for the microphone.
I just want to make sure we're clear with public meetings or accommodations, things such as a sign language interpreter, things like that. It's as long as we publish, if you need an accommodation, contact so-and-so, have a process for that. Is there like say that scenario, someone does show up, they haven't contacted us in advance. Are we still like legally exposed, in that scenario if they don't contact us in advance?
No, if you have the process in place that states, that I need a week or I need 2 weeks ahead of time to be able to secure that interpreter. One of the things you'll find is you're competing with everybody else in this room to get that interpreter. So it's very fair for you to put a time frame on there. And that's been adjudicated several times and agreed upon. So no, you would not be liable in that case. You might wish to take that individual separately and communicate with them through something like Ubi Duo or some other form of communication. The one I'm talking about is it's basically 2 computers that communicate to one another and they're able to communicate back and forth. But no, you would not be in that case at all.
For us in this training, you were just told by our consultant that does ASL translation that they need a month's notice. So ASL translators are in very high demand now. So just FYI, you're going to need a lot of time to ensure that you can provide that.
Just to repeat that, what I was stating, Jamie indicated that CMAP has learned that they need up to a month's advance for getting interpreters, that there's such high demand right now. So that should be considered relevant.
Yeah, I just want to share a note on your second bullet as far as continuing education. The government activity, it's a collaborative effort. I think if you're in a situation where you need to be providing information to other people, other agency staff, that you approach it in a way that's really positive, that tells that what you're trying to do is provide them with the information and the tools so that the good things that they're already doing can benefit the maximum number of people. Because nobody wants to go to a meeting to go, okay, here's another thing I've got to do. And you're going to get no attention, no retention of the information. Whereas if you talk about it as an empowering addition to what they're already doing, that, you know, let's face it, nobody gets into public service for the money, right? Right, to do good work. And if you frame it, I find the agencies I've talked to, you frame it in terms of here's another way so that more people can benefit from what you're doing, you get a lot better response.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately, everything we do is in service to the community. And all that we're trying to do with this education is to provide service for the entirety of the community. Moving on, next situation. You are Public Works, building, however your municipality handles that. A resident calls non-compliant bathroom within the community center. As you can see, this is a very old restroom. This is the primary restroom at that space. And this is the restroom that is available for a public meeting room that is offered. Public Works has a process for cataloging and handling fault calls as they come in. They don't automatically reach out to the ADA. They take care of this internally. They have their own system, but Public Works staff does notify you that the complaint exists. So the first question here is, they just called Public Works. They gave them a call. They said, hey, I was at the community center. The bathroom that's closest to the meeting room is not compliant. Is this considered a grievance? Would you consider this a grievance? Absolutely. Just because they don't fill out the paperwork doesn't mean that it's not a grievance. I think sometimes we think, well, if they didn't fill out the form, that it's not a grievance. But at the end of the day, it is a grievance. It's just a verbal grievance. What I would encourage them to do is to fill out the form so you have the record of it. Whether it's you fill it out over the phone with them, send it out to them and they fill it out. It is important to have the record of what the actual grievance is. Does this complaint need to be addressed by the ADA coordinator? Probably, but is the ADA coordinator the person who needs to follow through on the actions? It very well could be Public Works. This is one of those examples in which the ADA coordinator may just be the manager in this situation. They're the person who's making sure that all these steps are taking place. It could be a completely different department that's actually responsible for executing the results. So that initial engagement, who is responsible for reaching out to the complainant? Could be the city. The answer is the city. It could be the ADA coordinators. It could be Public Works. But what we find a lot is everybody expects the other person to reach out. The ADA coordinator's answer is, well, that's a Public Works situation. They need to reach out to them. Public Works answer is, this is an ADA question. Why is it the ADA coordinator? So the honest answer is, I don't care who reaches out to them, just reach out to them. And you're better off to have two people reach out than nobody reach out. So it could be either one. This is a good opportunity for that continuing education, to have that conversation of, whenever this happens, what is our process for reaching out to somebody? Can you hold on for one microphone?
The one thing you should point out is whoever if both entities reach out, make sure that it looks like they've talked to one another. So the ADA coordinator reaches out and the Public Works reaches out. Don't make it look like they're operating on different channels that don't know what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in that case, most likely the situation would be Public Works reaches out, then the ADA coordinator just sends an email like, hey, just wanted to make sure, you know, Public Works talked to you, that you guys have started this conversation or something of that nature. But yeah, you know, this is where you guys are going to be communicating together. You know, the ADA coordinator, a lot of times it's a position of one. So you got to rely on the rest of the staff of the community to offer that expertise. Based on your policy, based on whatever your practices are. The big thing is to develop those meeting minutes, the email, the phone log, whatever it is. And that really needs to be shared through both departments, because that lets everybody know where this is at in the process. So it continues. Who is responsible for responding in writing? Who do we think is responsible for responding in writing? Exactly, same answer. It's the city. It could be either one. If it's the ADA coordinator, there's a couple of key questions you need to be asking. Does the ADA coordinator have the authority to make changes? Is that an authority that the ADA coordinator has been given in your community? Because they can go through the whole process, say, we're gonna reconstruct and give you a brand new bathroom. But do they have the authority to actually say that? Probably not. So that's where the ADA coordinator is the one responding in writing, but it's gotta be that collaborative effort for this to work. And how will the resolution be performed? I guarantee you the ADA coordinator is most likely not giving out the contract to do this work. So who in the city is gonna actually follow through with the process? If it's Public Works, what's the process for documenting the response? Because the ADA coordinator needs that documentation to hold on to it for 3 years. So then Public Works goes through this whole process. And honestly, I'm open to once a year if it's that, like, you know, specifically for like sidewalk complaints. I'm a big advocate for, you know, every 3 months, just send over a group of, you know, emails of we fixed this problem, this problem, this problem. We got these 3 phone calls. This is how we fixed them. Throw them in the file. You know, this doesn't need to be consistent communication, but at the end of the day, the ADA coordinator has to have all that information. Because as we mentioned a couple of times, if someone shows up and asks questions, they're going to the ADA coordinator. They're not going to go to Public Works. They're going to go to the ADA coordinator. And this is where it's really important that the ADA coordinator knows what's going on.
I think what you're getting at too, and what we highly recommend as a very effective model, particularly for larger communities, is that you have an internal ADA committee. So that you have a representation from your major departments that are meeting consistently. So this information is, number one, shared. Number two, everybody's kept in. And it also increases your education process.
So the complainant is satisfied. Complete any agreed upon improvements, file it away for 3 years, everybody's happy. Complainant is not satisfying. In this case, it wasn't actually feasible to reconstruct this bathroom. But there was an ADA accessible bathroom 200 foot down the hallway. But they didn't have a sign telling them how to get to that bathroom. So the actual so they wanted the bathroom reconstructed. What the city ended up going with was installing the sign saying the nearest accessible bathroom is this one. Completely acceptable ADA solution, meets all the ADA requirements, not the answer that the person wanted to hear. So at the end of the day, the high-level official met with them. They went over, this is what the city solution is. This is why we can't do what you want to do. You know, it's a historic building. It's gonna cost $200,000 to add the bathroom. You know, it's too small, whatever the reason is. They explain that, and then you respond in writing with that final resolution of not just, we can't meet your grievance, but we're still meeting our ADA requirements by doing this, this, and this. Then you follow through on those activities. The answer isn't always going to be everybody what we used to have. Because as we all know, ADA changes aren't cheap. I think we all acknowledge that. So sometimes the best solution is we're going to do this now, and then we're going to, you know, we're going to reconstruct it 3 years from now whenever we get it in our budget. You know, it's that interactive process, but ultimately it's about meeting with the person and explaining why you're doing what you're doing. Because if you talk them through it and you say, I can't do this for you today, but we're going to do this today and we're going to do this tomorrow, that goes a long way than just not responding to that at all. Especially in this case, for that minimum of 3 years. Last example we have of the grievance procedure. A resident routinely visits Village Hall with what I will call their support dog. For those of you online, that was in quotes. The dog wanders around the Village Hall, generally misbehaves, barks at people, does all that good stuff. Is that an ADA service animal? No. ADA service animals are dogs that do work. If you've ever been around an ADA service animal, they do not bark, they do not wander, they do not leave their people. Like, they are there on a mission. So city staff informs the resident that their animal's not allowed inside City Hall. The resident files a grievance with you. So in this case, what's the first thing that you need to do? The very first thing you need to do is get all the information. Because the resident's gonna have one story, the city staff's gonna have another story. So it's really important to get all that information. You meet with the resident to gather their information. You meet with the city staff to gather their information. If you have cameras, I would suggest looking at the cameras and actually seeing what this dog is doing. You know, is it just one person in the city department who for whatever reason doesn't want a dog inside City Hall? It could be, it's probably not, but it very well could be. And then at that point, you meet with the resident and explain what a support dog, what a service dog actually is. They never wander, they seldom bark, they are very well-behaved animals. And the big thing I'll note here, this is where you need to be documenting everything. Because this is a he said, she said situation. So document the entire process, save that for 3 years. Another really important thing to note here, if the person removes their dog, they are welcome back inside the city building. You are asking the dog to leave the facility. You are not asking the person. Now, if that person says, I'm only coming back in with my dog, then that's a different scenario. But the big thing here is like, anytime this happens, the person's always allowed back in. And this is that value of internal ADA committee, maintain that communication. If this is happening, it's probably happening at multiple cities. So this is where you really need to be talking about this, talking about what your policies are, etc.
I have one point. One of the things you've probably heard before, and the whole service animal issue has been, if you will, confused a bit by my generation wanting to take their animals everywhere they go. If you're like me, oftentimes I see people driving with their dog in their lap, makes me a little nervous. But what you'll hear from people, but this dog is certified. I have the certification right here that shows it's a service animal. There's no such thing. That's not a legal document. That's a company, frankly, there's a couple of companies online that are doing that, providing those certifications to people, but those are not valid. That is not required. There's no certification of that animal to be shown. So if you hear that from the person, say, but your animal did not demonstrate service animal characteristics. As Travis knows, one of our national conferences symposium we had in Indianapolis, I had 5 dogs there, and 3 of them were barking at each other, running around, sniffing people's pockets, and even taking food. I had to remove those 3 animals, and they weren't happy. The people, your people are not going to be happy when you dismiss those animals, but you have every right to do so.
So this is where we're going to do questions in a break, but we're going to move on, so we'll keep going. Going back to the roles and responsibilities, as we previously talked about, you are an advocate. And this is, we had a little conversation on like about the EEO officer. And this is sort of where you start to move from compliance into the world of advocacy. Yes, you are responsible for compliance within your team, but you're also responsible for advocating. Just because something meets ADA, it doesn't always necessarily mean that it works for the residents in your community. And that's where you need to listen to your community, get to know your community, and learn what's not working for them. Strongly encourage you to maintain those relations. Whether it's they hold a end of the year meeting and you go and just get to know them because you want them coming to you. Like that's really the big thing that we're pushing for here. You want the disability to come to the community. Ongoing education on disability laws, keep yourself up to date on what's happening. That's going to help you advocate, is if you're up to speed on what's going on. Lastly, shameless plug for what Jim did, ADA National Symposium. And honestly, this meeting here today is, if you guys leave this meeting knowing that there's other people who are doing this job and that you can reach out within your own communities to get this support, the support's out there. I think one of the beautiful things about the ADA coordinator community is everybody knows that this job is hard. Everybody understands the challenges. So if you guys can develop your own little internal support system, that's really gonna help you. So, say Bournville has a question and you can reach out to Burridge on Burridge is like, oh, we just went through this internet process. I can share the RFP that we developed. That's gonna help the entire Chicagoland area become better. I think it's really important that we're all a team on this, because everybody's at a different place on this process. It sounds like the Forest Reserve has gone through an incredible effort on this. Other communities are just starting. So it's really important that we all lean on each other as we work towards this goal. Metropolitan Mayor's Committee, ADA Coordinators Committee, I know that existed for a while. I don't think it's super active right now. Yes, Jamie.
We are meeting them next week to understand the future role of that, if it's something that we want to continue going forward, so that we have a regional committee or group that can meet of ADA. Stay tuned.
So for those of you online, CMAP is going to be meeting with the Mayor's Caucus, it sounds like next week, to kind of talk about the possibility of restarting the ADA coordinators group locally. Employment, ADA is an employment issue, but I will say that a lot of times that falls under a different department. So you are collaborative with them, but that is, I fully admit, I am not an employment. I can tell you a lot of things about the ADA. I don't even know. The world of employment is a very unique situation. Where that could get into you, though, is in the world of reasonable accommodation. If someone makes a reasonable accommodation as part of employment, that's where it's going to come to you and say, we need to make these modifications to this building for that reasonable accommodation. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on employment. Just wanted to make you aware of the fact that most likely through employment is where the reasonable accommodations are going to come from. And that is really where it might start to impact public works, building departments, departments of that nature. Public face. You guys are the public face of your community. I know we don't all want to be the public face of our community, but at the end of the day, this is the job that we've signed up for. And if anybody ever comes knocking on the door, fortunately, they're going to be knocking on. So just want to be completely transparent. That is part of being ADA coordinator, is that if there ever is if that ever goes any farther, you are going to be involved in those conversations. Building your internal team. We've kind of talked about it a little bit, wanted to kind of dive into sort of what a model that we think works really well. Number one, you need to officially designate that ADA coordinator. If you haven't done it yet, we already talked about that. Codify it, make it an official position. It can be a shared position. It doesn't have to be a standalone position, but make it so that person X in your community is the ADA coordinator. And big thing is participating in the budgeting process. Doesn't necessarily need to be that they are in those meetings, but they need to know what's going on budget-wise. Because the ADA coordinator is going to know where some of those challenges exist. So they need to be part of that conversation. How that works for your community is kind of to be determined, but I would encourage that at least they're part of some of those budgeting meetings. Because, if you're the ADA coordinator and the website's an issue, you need to be in those budgeting meetings to say, guys, we need to dedicate some money to start this process. Or if you're getting a bunch of complaints about the community center, that's where you need to be in there for the budgeting process saying, the community center is getting a lot of complaints. Can we do something to make that more accessible for our community? It's really important that you guys introduce yourselves to city staff. I'm not saying that you need to do a full meeting or anything like that, but when you go around, talk to people, introduce yourself as an ADA coordinator, say if anybody ever calls with a complaint, reach out to me. Make sure the city staff knows that if on the issues of ADA, they can come to you for help. This includes an existing employee who takes on that additional responsibility. If you used to be the building code person in the city, but now you're building code coordinator, let people know that this is an additional responsibility that you have taken on and that you are available to them as a resource. A question that I find that a lot of communities haven't necessarily answered is, who does the ADA coordinator report to? Do you report to the Public Works Department? Do you report to the Building Department? Do you report to the city administrator? Sort of, what is that reporting process in your community? In your county, in your governmental entity? A sort of, because it might not be the same person that you report to for all your other job sites. It might have to be something else in which for 80% of your job, you report to the director of public. But on ADA issues, you talk to the city attorney because he wants to know everything that's going on in the world of ADA. So it might not be as easy as you report to the same boss that you reported to yesterday. It's figuring out for the unique role of the ADA coordinator, who needs to be in the loop on that. Lastly, it's about empowerment. Hopefully you guys are getting some empowerment out today. Hopefully the staff, the support, the leaders in your community are empowering you. And if they're not, continue to work at it, you're doing good work, and keep going, and really reach out to each other. Liaisons, we already passed out those forms, but just to hit on it again, this is really important. Because you're not going to know the answer to every question, and you are not expected to know the answer to every question. The role of an ADA coordinator is not to know every single part of the ADA. Jim was on the task force that wrote the original ADA in like what, 88?
89.
89? Jim does not know every single part of the ADA. That's not his role, and that's not your guys' role either. So it's important that you know who you're reaching out to in those other departments to get that support. Handout number 2 is those sheets that we already talked about. Keys to success. I think this is critical. Accommodations are reactive. And especially in the beginning, we're going to find that we're being very reactive. There's a problem, we go out and we fix that problem. But at the end of the day, accessibility is proactive. Accessibility is, as we do everything in our community, we're thinking about the disabled community, we're thinking about people who are disabled. Because I think we all agree it's a lot cheaper to build it right the first time than it is to alter it and fix it the second time. So from today, you have your past, you have the city's past, and you're going to have to deal with that. You're going to make modifications over time. You're going to make accommodations. You're going to fix all that. But moving forward, everything can be ADA. And if you make everything ADA compliant, it's going to allow you to focus on the past because you know the future is being built properly. And especially like post 92, if you walk around, you'll note that yes, the building's brand new, but it's not ADA compliant. That's a future headache for you. It's a future headache for the city. So if you have those concerns, get yourselves into those meetings. If you feel like there's new buildings are being built, new government buildings are being built, and those aren't compliant buildings, ask those questions. That is your job as ADA coordinator. Part of advocating for the disability community is asking those questions in those city meetings of like, okay, everyone, why isn't this ADA? This is a brand new building. What's our reason for not making this accessible? There could be a very good reason, but go through that process, have them talk through it. And a lot of times what you'll find the answer is, well, no offense to architects if you're an architect, but it's so pretty, but it's not accessible. Break down silos. Every city has silos. So you're gonna have to break down those silos. It's gonna be one of the hardest parts of the ADA coordinator job, in which you're gonna have to get that contact in the police. You're gonna have to get that contact in communication, that contact in public works. The ADA coordinator cannot do this on their own. So it's figuring out who you have to sell this to in order to break down those silos. And the gentleman from Cook County mentioned this earlier, we have to sell the positives. ADA is about being inclusive to all citizens. ADA is not about being a federal mandate. I think we think of ADA as it's a federal law, it's a federal mandate, something that we have to do on top of what we currently do. But what it really is that it's an opportunity to open up our community to everybody in that community. Now, there's a federal law that tells us how to do it, But really what that law is trying to do is get us to do what I'm gonna say is the right thing to do anyway. I don't think any community is specifically trying to keep people out of their city hall. Nobody's trying to stop them from voting. Nobody's trying to stop them from using the pool. What it is that there's barriers to access that exist, and we gotta come up with a plan to eliminate those barriers. So really what we're not trying to do is we're not trying to meet the mandate. What we're trying to do is open up our community for everyone. And I think that's a big challenge in this. For better or for worse, over the last 30 years, this has become a federal mandate issue. But I think it's really important that we sell this as this is a community access issue. So I would encourage you to sell this as positively as you possibly can. You sell the good parts of this. If you have elected officials who don't support this, remember people with disabilities vote too. So all those factors. Keep those lines of communication open. You're going to go through all this process. You're going to develop your list of liaisons. Reach out to them every once in a while. Make a note that every 6 months you're going to call your liaison and be like, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. How's everything going in the department? If it's going great, it's a 5-minute conversation. If there's issues, you're creating that opportunity to learn about what that challenge is. Big thing here, aid, even if it's not the standard operating procedure. If your rules, we ran into this. So in the last 10 years, safety's become a big issue at city halls. The installation of bullet resistant, front panels for the staff to be behind. Those are major challenges for ADA. You put up this bullet resistant glass, they have the little cubby hole that they pass stuff through. That's a major ADA issue. So you built it for a very specific reason. But the question is, if someone comes in with a disability, is there another way you can do that? Is there a way that you can take them back to a back meeting room and you can sit face to face? If it's an option, can you walk around and meet them in the front lobby and help them that way? You have a table at your lobby so someone with a wheelchair can write out the information. Because those safety counters are high. They're almost always high. So if you have a table there, then yeah, that's not ADA, that doesn't meet pure ADA accessibility requirements. What you're doing is you're providing a resolution to help them do what they need. So I would encourage you to figure out what works for your community and to do that while you work towards ultimate ADA compliance. If you ever remodel City Hall, it needs to be ADA compliant. But until that day happens, reach out to your public and help them. I think it's really tempting to stand behind, I have a transition plan and I haven't gotten to you. When in reality, the answer is, I have a transition plan. How can I help you today before I fix your problem tomorrow? If that makes sense. If you can hold on for the microphone.
No, while you're asking, this is actually a test because you put us in a room that doesn't have an 88 counter.
Oh yeah, I'm aware. But yeah, so in that case, what they could do though is you flip one of these tables around, you take that table, you slide it right here, all of a sudden you can solve that problem. The answer isn't always reconstruct everything. I think that's our first instinct with ADA, is it's gonna make me reconstruct my entire system. What it's really gonna make you do is get creative. It's gonna make you find those creative solutions. And at some point, whenever this gets remodeled, it'll get fixed at that point. But until then, figure out the way to help you. Patience and persistence, it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be hard. The beauty is, I guarantee you that it's worth it. I don't know how often anymore you get an opportunity to truly help somebody access a part of their life that they cannot get at. And you have that opportunity of taking it so somebody can't go pay their own water bill, they can pay their own. I mean, just think about the power that brings to that person. And that's something that we get to do as ADA coordinators. ADA advisory committees, I will state off the fact that this isn't necessarily perfect for every single community, but I think there's a version of this that can work for every single community. And I think it's important because number one, people with disabilities need representation. Of all the communities here, how many people have an elected official as
I have a.
Yeah.
Not like.
no idea? So you got that? I will add to that. You guys probably have one, you don't even know it. Like, so I don't have this slide in here, but like 75% of disabilities are hidden disabilities. When we think disabilities, we think blind, we think deaf, we think. Those are the disabilities that we think. What we don't think of is cognitive disability. What we don't think of is, long-term health, cancer, strokes, things of that nature. Those are all disabilities too. So odds are, if 1 in 4 households have a disability, odds are one of your elected officials has a disability and you're not even aware. But it shows a commitment to that meaningful engagement. This looks really good. If anybody ever comes in and asks questions about what you're doing, if the answer is, we're letting the disability community guide what we're doing. We have a question.
Or a comment on the question. It's still a work in process on my end, but I try to address the public advisory, ADA advisory committee. I'm trying to coerce to fold it in with the DEI. Trying to make sure groups are represented in the community. It seems logical to me.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it could be folded into other committees. It could be standalone committees. I think the big thing is get the disability community to have a seat at a table. It might not be every table, but you get at a table, it's the start. Lastly, they are going to be a great resource for new ideas. I guarantee they know the challenges in the community better than you guys know the challenges in yourself. Because you can walk around all day, but if you don't have cognitive disabilities, have we ever thought about how signage works in our city hall? You walk around and you're trying to figure out where to go. If you have someone with a cognitive disability, it's like, let's go for a walk around City Hall. And you will learn more from them than they will ever learn from you. Guarantee it. Moving on, concerns, and this is a big question to ask yourself before you do it. Make sure that it's going to be meaningful. Worst case scenario here is you start a committee and then the committee doesn't actually do it. So if you're going to do a committee, make it a meaningful committee. Next up, new ideas and policies are not brought before the committee. If you're going to have a committee, they don't need to see every single policy. I'm not saying that, but if you're going to pass a disability resolution, make sure the committee sees it before it gets passed. Next up, staff does not value the opinion of the committee. This is going to happen. I'm just going to tell you right now, if you decide to do an ADA advisory committee, there's going to be someone in the city staff who's not going to. But I think what you'll find is that over time, they'll learn to value. So invite them to come to the meetings, invite them to be part of the conversation. Lastly, legal considerations. This is a committee within your city. So the question is, how do you guys start committees? How do people get elected onto these committees? It needs to follow whatever your guys' process is. Board composition, there's no magic answer on the number of seats. It could be 3, it could be 5, it could be 25. The big thing is, make sure that they're there to do a reason. Broad representation of people with disabilities. If you have a disability committee with 5 people who are in wheelchairs on it, they're only going to represent one part of the disability community. So go out and find those members of your community. They're there, guarantee that they're there. Lastly, include someone from the municipal staff in that committee. Going to start to create those bonds between the disability community and the community. This is a great way to, start to work together, start to work collaboratively. And the big thing is, if anything does ever happen, this is another great place for someone with a complaint to start. They call someone in the disability committee. They say, oh, the city's been great to work with. Call this person, they can help. You're getting those fingers out into the disability community so that you can start to learn their needs. Duties and function, it's important that we define what the committee does. What is their role? If they're not going to have a say in policy, it needs to be very clear that they are going to advise, they are not going to set policy. Questions like that. What's going to be their functions? What will the committee produce? You know, are they gonna produce recommendations? Are they gonna produce documents? You know, what is their goals? Because the one thing you don't want to have happen is you invite all these people onto your committee. They're all gonna have their own ideas. They're all gonna be excited. They agree to join your committee. And then you're like, okay, guys, what do we want to do? And you're gonna get a million different answers on what they want to do. So have some answers to this before you guys start the committee process. They're gonna be an advisory committee that's gonna provide opinions, but not final decision-making on issues with disabilities. That's their role. What they're gonna produce is they're gonna produce a memo that will be presented to the Public Works Director for their opinion. And then that's the document that's gonna be produced from these meetings. Make it official. I'm a big advocate for this. Again, codify, whether it's they are appointed by the mayor, whether it's that they are elected, whatever the process is, make it an official committee like all your other committees in your community. Membership criteria. For your guys' communities, does someone have to live in that community to serve on a committee? Is that a rule within your community? So yeah, it's a business owner, it's a resident of the community. So if that's a requirement, then you know where you need to go look for your disability. If you're not finding members there, then this all needs to be part of that process. Someone says, oh, I work in your community, can I be on the disability? I can't answer that question. That's based on whatever your guys' process is. Maybe they can, maybe they can't. Advertise it, sell it. This is an exciting thing for the disability community. If other boards have a web page, make a web page. If they don't have a web page, make a standalone web page just for them. But what we found on a couple different scenarios is through the ADA transition plan process, the community will make a commitment. And at the end of the day, they're not treated like every other committee within that community. They were created for a project. They were not created for long-term committee. So if you're going to make a committee, all I would say is treat it like every other in your city. Common issues, define a quorum. You have 7 members, how many have to show up to have a meeting? ADA advisory committees, and does any community here have an ADA advisory committee? Can you share a little bit about how that process has gone for you?
So we codified our Commissioner of Aging and changed the role of Commissioner of Aging and Disabilities. The mayor appoints all of the committee members, and there are 9 members. The committee members that are part of the commission, because it's the commission on aging and disabilities, but there can be subcommittees that do not have to be a part of the commission. There are 9 members, quorum is 5, no matter if there are vacancies or not. So now I have 7 members, but it's still 7, it's still 5.
Yes, that's another thing to remember. Yeah, it's like every committee or commission, there's going to be fluctuating members. So has it been successful? Has it been valuable?
So we just actually changed the Commissioner on Aging, been around since 1976. But we noticed that many of our older adults at some point have a disability.
Absolutely.
And so we thought that it would be great to just combine them. And so we just changed the law for that. We have to have 1/3 older adult, 1/3 person with a disability, and 1/3 a person who is a care partner. They have to be a resident, or they have to have some significant tie to the community. And we really don't allow for members to be like part of a caregiving organization. That would be more like there for business purposes. And all of them are volunteers. And our ADA coordinator, which is a new position that we're hiring, will be the staff person. Our senior services division manager now is that staff. So that's pretty much how.
Very good. Exciting time. Does anybody else have an advisory committee that they'd like to spend a little time talking about?
Yeah, ours is the Advisory Commission on Disability specifically, and the component of the targeted work is ADA compliance amongst advocating and communication and resources, et cetera, as part of its goals. We actually have 9 seats also, and ours are currently filled. They haven't started focusing on the ADA compliance yet, and I am the particular staff liaison for that that commission. But they've been focusing on resources, information, and really identifying and gathering the community. Found that to be the big need is, they're there, but they need to know the commission is there. So we're working on relationship building so that we can have better impact.
Very good. That's an example of using that commission to reach out into the community. I see one more hand up.
I just wanted to add one thing for if you don't have one. As I explained what we've done with the force reserves to a lot of other people, they're thrilled to hear we have it, and that buys a lot of goodwill for the community, that know we're doing the right thing, and it's not the right attention. But if you put one together, a really easy thing to look at is contact a local special rec organization to start with, whether it's north suburban, south suburban, southwest, west suburban. They'll help you get going. And we broke ours into 2 subcommittees, one for physical improvements and one for programmatic. And I think that covers everything your community needs to look forward to. And then you can have a meet annually as a whole. That might make it easier for you to manage.
Also, the city of Evanston is an age-friendly city. We're also dementia friendly, so I would also, look at those resources. We have an age-friendly business initiative where if individuals qualify, one of our commissioners will go out and look at everything, and most of that stuff is related to ADA compliance. They get a decal, so they get perks for being an age-friendly business. And so I think you gotta see how those things tie. So, what's good for, when you think about age friendliness, what's good for someone who has a stroller is also really good for a person who's in a wheelchair. So when you start connecting those dots, I think that's important. And so this new position that we're hiring is going to be a manager position. They will also supervise special rec in our inclusion.
Let's see.
12 years, I was staff liaison to the Disability Access Commission for Parks. But the one comment that I would make is, as you develop your groups of these commissions, think about the group that you're trying to attract to these committees. These are people that have tremendous difficulty actually getting to Village Hall, the Civic Center. Our greatest achievement in that whole process was the road show. Every month we took the commission to a different senior centers, park district, whatever, broadcast it in front. Let me tell you, the folk, the older generations, they just love to make that a night. They talk about their experiences being on the road and taking this whole process to them. It's a tremendous piece that you should not ignore.
Oh, very good. Yeah, as you can see, a bunch of different commissions doing a bunch of different things. I think it's about finding what works best for your community. But the big thing you're going to get out of it is continuing to develop. And really, I think whenever you give people the chance to speak, you're going to learn a lot of stuff that you could already know. Realistic expectations. Members are going to join the thing. In fact, we all need to be aware of it. So again, that's where if you have clear expectations of what the commission does, it helps to address those personal agendas, authority, openness to feedback. That's all going to come over time. This commission isn't going to change the world the first day, but what it can do is slowly start to make things better. Lastly, no clear goals and objectives. Effective communication. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this and sort of to lump this all up into one thing. What this means is meeting the needs of the individual. As I was talking to someone today, sign language interpreting, ASL interpreting. That's not one language. There's 20 different versions of ASL that exist. So it's not just, you need a sign language interpreter, here's my sign language interpreter. It's that conversation of like, okay, if what kind of sign language interpreter do you need? What's the best way to communicate with? Because this is where we all like systems. We all like, I do A, I do B. Effective communication is about what works for that individual person at the end of the day. All communication is unique, and it really allows that person with a disability to communicate clearly and to get their issue heard. No standard way to effectively communicate. Examples, this is what Jim was talking about earlier, that Udi Duo. And what it is you can type into it, and it'll talk back, you can talk into it, and it'll type. But it's basically a way to do communication between two different people. Large print. A lot of times what you'll find the community needs is they just need large print. Braille. Haven't seen the official numbers lately, but it's what, like 15%?
9%.
9%. 9% of the blind community reads Braille. So we all think blind community, Braille. 9% of the blind community reads Braille. So if someone says, I'm blind and I'm coming to a meeting, don't just run out and print your 100-page document in Braille. Reach out to them and say, how can I best help you? Flash drives and technology has really become sort of the future of it. They have screen readers now on the computer. You can magnify it. All this stuff is available. So don't be surprised when people ask you for flash drives. That being said, if you're going to make a PDF, it needs to be an accessible PDF. If you're going to make a document, it needs to be an accessible document. And like Microsoft, all those large companies now, they have accessibility buttons you can click in like the top right corner, and it will help you through the process. Communication access real-time translation. This is another option that exists. You can do virtual sign language interpreters. If in that example where someone shows up at your zoning commission meeting and they're deaf, since you had your 14 days notice, you don't have, they're past the window. But if you want to go beyond what the requirements are, you can get someone on the phone and do real-time sign language interpreting with them over the phone. Now, 14 days in advance, that's not an allowable option. You need to get the sign language interpreter. But there is those last second, those spur of the moment in which you can provide that accessibility and go beyond what the compliance requirements are.
Particularly an emergency situation.
Yeah, so this has really become big: fire, police, EMS, in which you arrive at an accident, the person's deaf, your sign languaging, you don't have time to get a sign language interpreter out there. So those services do exist. And if anybody has any questions about those, we can certainly get you some information on that as well. Lastly, assistive listening devices, visual alarms, sign language, computers, all this stuff is options. The big question I have for you guys is, who pays for this? The city pays for this. The big thing here is the person who's making the request never pays for this stuff. This is a requirement of the city to provide these services. We are going to go ahead and take another break now, 15-minute break. We will regroup at 11:40, and then all the rest of our time today is just going to be spent talking about scenarios. So if there's anything that you specifically have as an ADA coordinator, we'll talk about that. Otherwise, we have 3 or 4 sort of pre-made scenarios for us to go through. So over this 15-minute break, if you want to take some time and think about sort of, I have this question in my city that I've never gotten answered, now's the time to ask it. Before we go to break, Nick, anything on the chat?
Nothing.
Okay, good deal. We will regroup at 11:40. Thank you. We have a bunch of pre-prepared scenarios, but I would much rather go through any specific questions that you guys might have. So just like to open up the floor to anyone who has a specific area issue that they were hoping to discuss today. Go for it. Yep, microphone's on its way.
I've got a specific scenario in my city. Our city hall is a historic, 100-plus-year-old building. Council chambers is on a second floor that we currently do not have any accessible road to. I'm aware of that problem and that we can move meetings to other facilities, things like that. I know what we need to do with the present now to deal with accommodating. My question and problem is that the building was substantially remodeled in the 90s, post-ADA. I don't have a good understanding, although I'm trying, I was hired by the city 8 months ago. I'm now the ADA coordinator. I'm trying to drag it into the 21st century kicking and screaming, but it's taking some time. I don't have a good understanding of what our level of exposure is with that relative to, me making good faith efforts now today on behalf of the city to, make things better.
So I think my first question for you is, does the city have an ADA transition?
Not yet. I'm working on it.
So that's a big first step. Get the ADA transition plan, document that it exists. Publicly acknowledge that this barrier to access exists. And then from there, develop sort of what the short-term, long-term. So I think in the world of exposure, that ADA transition plan is a big first step in living.
I guess I'm just asking, like, is there do we have a significantly higher risk because of the fact that we remodeled after the ADA was enacted
Yes.
and didn't do it properly?
Yeah.
And I mean, how great is our exposure regardless of what, we're working on addressing that. I'm doing a master plan right now and things like that. We're working on addressing it, and it will be addressed in my transition plan, what we'll be doing about it. But I guess I'm just really concerned about like our level of legal, liability exposure with it, given that it was done after the building code, we remodeled after the building code should have told us, don't do it this way, and.
I would certainly say that there is more exposure there, but at this point, we all know what the level of effort is. Eliminate the exposure. So I think now it's about limiting the exposure. And that is the transition plan. That is having it clearly stated that if, someone needs to get up there for a meeting, that you guys are willing to do what you need to do to accommodate that person. And that's not the final solution, but you need to work towards the final solution. So I can't guarantee that you can eliminate all exposure, but I think the best thing you can do to limit the exposure is to just take care of the people.
A couple of things I would ask is, do you have an advisory committee? I think your advisory committee can also be the people that can contact their local alder, or the city council or all aldermen, make them understand the priority of this. A great deal as voters generally has a little bit more influence. Yes, you have high exposure right now, not just the DOJ, but the Illinois as well, because Illinois' code goes back into the 80s. And so, you've got a great deal of exposure there. And I think the other question I asked you with your transition plan, do you have a commitment from the higher ups, if you will, that they're budgetarily willing to address?
We haven't defined yet how we plan on addressing the issue. We're still figuring, are we gonna remodel City Hall or are we gonna build a new one? We're trying to solve those problems right now. And then, it's once we've picked a lane, then we're gonna address it in the plan, it's sort of.
That's great. I think that's what you can do right now. And as Travis said, deal with the individual situation as needed.
Since grandfathered in.
Dick pointed out that several communities or sometimes even professionals will tell you, oh, well, you're grandfathered in. And I just want to clarify, there is no such thing as grandfather.
Well, I won't out the architect, but we had facilities assessments done like 2 years ago, and they identified it as, the historical building that, doesn't need to be, you know what I mean, that needs to be addressed, but, they said it's, pre-ADA, and that's not accurate. It's not even an accurate thing. We remodeled after ADA, so it's not accurate.
The White
I
House.
just want to clarify, there is, as Nick said, there is no such thing as grandfather clause.
You got a question?
Kind of a follow-up on that. No, our bathrooms are ADA compliant just because anecdotally that's been said, but every time I contact someone, they want to remodel our bathrooms and that's going to be ADA compliant. It's kind of like you're scratching your head. What is your advice? That might be and assessment and everything like that. What is your advice on getting, we want to get to that, but finding that to do it is that,
I think where I would start would be to look at bringing on a consultant and not necessarily do all the drawings and everything else, but to just tell you the feasibility of what. Because that's the big question that you need to quantify for budgeting and everything else. Or can you remodel the existing space or do you need to create this? So I think for a fairly reasonable price, you could bring someone in to focus on that fairly specific element. Acknowledging that, yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on, but bring it up about because you can't really start the planning process until you know what the magnitude of work is. Goes back.
what kind of Google search? Am I searching for ADA consultants?
Contact Rob.
So Robin Jones is with the Great Lakes ADA Center. She talked at the last presentation, and she is the National ADA Center for Chicago area. And they do technical support, they do trainings, they do all that stuff, and I would give her a call and she can, help you in that direction.
Thank you.
Sort of, yeah, so.
You can reach the Great Lakes ADA Center, anyone in here can, as long as your cell number is from one of these area codes, like just calling 800-949-ADA for ADA. So 4232. So it's 1-800-949-4232.
I wanted to know, going to your question, though, part of it, because we deal with everything from single rooms to vast facilities, part of it depends on scale. It's not practical to hire somebody to do the assessment. In that case, I would advise them, as an architect, but it's a small endeavor. Because you're going to need the drawings anyway. The reality is, licensed architect is required to design something compliant, and if it turns out that it's not, you can go back to them and say, sorry, you need to do more work. They're required to do this. So it is part of the deal of getting to call yourself a licensed architect. Depends on the scale.
Yeah, I was thinking of it more from like the citywide perspective, so that you can identify where you need to start reaching out to that licensed architect. Because at the end of the day, people are going to need those drawings, and as a community, it is worth the investment in that drawings. Because now somebody else is standing behind the fact. Because if you bring a contractor in and say, make this ADA accessible, it comes back.
Sign off on some of this.
Yeah,
There's a lot of variety in how like architects and construction managers, general contractors are structured these days. There's a lot of overlap in those different functions between firms. And you might have some success trying a general contractor with that route, being able to do like a design and build for you, being able to both design a solution and execute for you.
which I think is a really good option, as long as they're willing to put their seal behind that option. Like, that's the big thing, is
At the end of the
at
day.
the end of the day, you want that seal.
Yes.
Because that seal is your community's guarantee that someone's saying this can be done. So yeah, design build's a great option. Just make sure you ask for the seal, because you don't always get it every single time. Any other specific questions somebody would like to bring up? One,
So as I mentioned, I'm the public works director, but also the ADA coordinator. The reason that came to me was many years ago, IDOT sent out a letter to all the agencies saying that the federal funding was at risk. You didn't do a ADA transition plan. So of course, the engineers got that.
yeah,
It's fine. And the engineers, they focus on the right of way, and that's really where talk about our facilities, but I'm curious. But our facilities are lacking. Big thing is the self-evaluation. I can't give up, I mean, exactly wrong, but is the, I'm curious if other agencies have separated the right of way from the facilities to look at transition plans for each. Even when you look at the IDOT manual, they really focus on right of way. than the IDOT manual. So I'm a little worried when you focus on the right of way, you realize things about being in facilities, and all of a sudden. Right, this public works, there's so much more involved.
do we have anybody from?
They're all.
They're all online. Fantastic. So I will speak for them. If you are an IDOT and you would like to put something in the chat, please do. But IDOT's focus is public rights of way. So all their ADA stuff is focused on public rights of way. I think the big thing to remember, and what we have worked with communities to do public rights of way transition plans and then work on other plans as well, and that's fine. But the challenge is IDOT focuses on public rights of way because that's their purview, where they operate. But the ADA expands into so much more now. So what we have found with a lot of communities, if I know the middle of your reference, probably the busiest I've ever been in my life, is they do what IDOT tells them to do. They name an ADA coordinator, but then that ADA coordinator doesn't realize all the rest of the stuff that they've been. So what we've done with some communities is you would be the public rights of way ADA coordinator, but then there'd be someone in like the city clerk's office who's the overall for the community, and that's acceptable. Or it's just understanding that you're going to have to coordinate with these other agencies. But ultimately, you do need to do that self-evaluation. That's a federal requirement, that's not an IDOT requirement. So the federal requirement requires the self-evaluation for all the programs, services, and activities. Sidewalks are on there because sidewalks have clearly been identified by the court system as a program of the community. So sidewalks, we have to self-evaluate sidewalks because they're a program of the community. But that also means, going to City Hall. If you have your own recreation department, it's your baseball fields, it's your swimming pools, all that stuff falls underneath the self-evaluation. And I think, so the good news is everybody, I think, acknowledges that it's a process. And getting the public rights of way done is a great step in that process. But I would encourage the rest of your community to know that they still have their own obligations.
There's one more, there's a you guys, I can't remember the website. I wish, there's a resource I stumbled across in going through some of CMAP's ADA stuff that, I believe it was hosted by UIC, but there was a college in the area that was hosting a like Google Maps / GIS based audit of like intersections and sidewalks and things like that. I wish I could remember the website, but it's a really cool tool. We're looking in, I've already started talking to my public works department about having like any workers that are on like light duty. You can sit at a computer and look at Google Maps and audit our sidewalk ramps and things like that for us. And it was a really cool tool. I want to say the only city in the suburbs that looked like they completed the audit was Naperville. I want to say, so it's in early stages, but if any of you know that resource, it'd be something good to share.
I know it is. I was on the part of the panel that helped advise that, so it's Patty over here. But it's called Project Sidewalk. And that I will caution to say that that's not a replacement for the self-identification, because you can't go and measure slopes from a camera or anything like that that you might get people observation. So there definitely is that exposure component there, but it's definitely like, okay, we get just a general idea that doesn't go into a legal document, but and just kind of get the general knowledge going.
Looking at it as a tool
Yeah,
to
and
expedite the process.
we discussed it as a tool for public engagement, just have people, oh, this is my, outside my house, you know, I mark it. And all those sorts of things, and you can see a map almost of where all the problems. So.
Hi, I was just gonna mention that the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus is actually hosting a workshop with UIC, talking about the project sidewalk tool. I think initially we're gonna be talking about barriers and addressing accessibility on sidewalks, but if there's enough interest, we're also looking at potentially having a workshop to demonstrate how to use that tool to help gather information for.
Did that answer your question, sir? Yeah. Long answer short, the entirety of the city's covered, but you can define sort of who's responsible for this.
And we did a self-evaluation years ago, and one piece of advice maybe, I don't know how you're gonna agree up there, we hired 2 architectural grad students. Trained them how to use a smart level and the surveyors, did. We trained them on what boards to get a baseline. And where we saw big deficiencies and barriers, at least it was a starting point that we didn't have to have our staff dedicate time. Turned out, there's a lot of work students can do in the summer. I mean, you'll get more information than you need, and you can get them. And it's just the way to think about doing an initial transition plan, to have something on paper for barriers.
So I had a question more about the hierarchy. About, so I'm part of a county government, I'm housed in the Division of Transportation. I'm a planner and I'm tasked with the transition plan, but I also have other county EDA coordinators. So how does that hierarchy work? When a person in the transition plan that should be leading the charge, or you're taking that?
So I guess to get more information about this, so like each department within the county has an ADA coordinator established. And you are the ADA coordinator for highways transportation.
Yes.
And then you're tasked with doing a transportation specific ADA transition plan.
There are some elements to what is mostly transportation, but there's definitely some nods to other county.
Is there someone who's sort of the overarching ADA coordinator over everything, or is it kind of a flat system?
Flat system.
Okay, so I think that's where I think my answer would be you are the most qualified person to lead that. You are in the transportation department, you have the transportation. When you are working within those other departments, obviously the other ADA coordinators involved. But I would say this is sort of yours to lead and get assistance as you assistance with those other departments. Now, if another department has already done an ADA transition plan, obviously lean on them for what they learned. But I think from a technical component, you're gonna have the most technical knowledge of what you need to collect for the specific ADA. In that case, what we've seen with like the very large county governments is they'll have their whatever 6, 7 ADA transition plan. And then have like a 4-page overarching document that tells people where to go to find out what they want to find out. Then that document is like, if you have a question in transportation, call person A. If you have a question in human resources, call person B. Because that's the challenge of having those 7 plans, is someone's going to find your plan and not realize that another plan exists for the building department. So that's the advantage. I would strongly suggest having an overarching document that just acknowledges that everybody exists, so that people can easily find where they are. If that helps.
Thank you.
Else? Yes, sir.
First, thank you for putting this together. CMAP already since 20-something years, I haven't really had training on this specifically. So this helps us from the DDA. 2 quick things, not necessarily CMAP, but maybe Great Lakes ADA really help us. We have a resource guide or something to our jobs, and these trainings are helping us a ton. But I'll retire, the next person will come in, they'll have to start all over. Guide to help. And the second thing is, if we were ever looking for a luncheon topic, special events, that's one of those ones where I get pushed back. Those guys are going to say, what says this specifically, learn more about reasonable accommodation. Find interpretations of that or something.
Good. So first things first, there's a book on that. Jim has one in the car for you. There is a link. So our very first case study is special events. And there's a link in there, if anybody wants to go and find it, that's called like the ADA Guide to Temporary Events. Prepared by Department of Justice.
Prepared by us, but endorsed by them.
So that is literally everything related to temporary events, even down to the percentage of porta potties that have to be ADA. Because that is covered by ADA. I'll hold off on a second and, oh, go Jim.
I just wonder if there's anybody else that needs one. I have 3 with.
So we have 3. So we have 3 available. And then,
But you can contact Robin's office to.
yeah, if you reach out to Robin's office, they have this boxes on. It's called, don't cheat and steal my answers. It is called the ADA Title II Compliance Guide for Temporary Events. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to follow up, I think it would be helpful if we could contact someone, because we have our, wearing different hats of municipal government and ADA coordinator, and then being involved with different chapters or building inspectors throughout the state. To have our training, like you were saying, we have the 2-hour lunch and learns. I don't know, we communicate to try to get someone out, for our local chapter meetings that we have.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think sort of let's stay in contact because there's certainly people who are available to help. And going back to the resources, I'll make this commitment for CMAP. I think the plan is to keep this website going in perpetuity. And as we find resources are going to be added to that. So hopefully in the future, the answer is you can go to this CMAP page and there'll just be a list of resources that are available. And I would encourage you, if you come across a resource that you really like, send it off to CMAP and they'll add it to the list as well. Like this is very much intended to be a landing page for ADA coordinators, especially those new to the job, in which they can just start, okay, I have a question about the Department of Justice, where do I go? I have a question about, grievance procedures, where do I go? So I think that webpage is going to continue to develop over time, but I think that's one of the long-term benefits of this project is that we will have that one clearinghouse location available for everyone.
We do have a connection to IDOT. They sent out an email to reach out to them for any ADA questions.
Yeah, and IDOT provided contact information as well in the chat, so we'll get that out on CMAP's website as well. And for how you can get a hold of IDOT. Questions related to this. So, case study number 1, community festival in a city park. Just to provide some examples, large outdoor event located at City Park. Estimated number of attendees are 2,000. Mayors and guests will be speaking from a stage. There's fixed seating, grass lawn, and standing room. There's an adjacent parking lot, and there is one permanent restroom and drinking fountain available. I don't know if 2,000 is a standard number, but I think every community has a festival like this that exists somewhere within their calendar for the year. So, very first question I'll ask you guys, does the stage need to be accessible? Yes. The answer to that is yes. So it's an accessible route to the stage from the seating area. So I will say a lot of these are grass festivals, and I know I'm not allowed to endorse products, but I'll mention that it exists. There are temporary mats that you can get that are accessible mats that you can lay out over grass, over sand, over all those unstable surfaces to provide that temporary accessibility. And then you just pull them up at the end of the festival and the grass goes back. So there's a whole bunch of different companies that make this, but it's literally, you can just have a stockpile of them somewhere in a warehouse. And for that temporary event, you can just roll it out. So New Orleans Jazz Festival every year, that's a couple 100,000 people, I believe. They have their permits, sidewalks, but they're also just miles of this temporary accessible path that they lay out for providing accessibility. So if you do a quick little Google search, you can find out where those are available. Access to the microphone. This is another big part of this, is it's not just getting on the stage, you have to be able to talk from the stage. So if, for example, you have a two-tiered stage, they can get to the bottom, but the microphone's permanently in the back. That's not accessibility. They need to be able to get on stage and they need to be able to talk. Lastly, effective communication. If you're gonna have a concert or something like that, how do you know if you need a sign language? Do you have your notice on this? Another great place to put your notice. There's going to be a concert. If you need accommodations, let us know. If it's a big enough concert, I would suggest just having a sign language interpreter there anyway. But a lot of these are smaller, you might get 100 people to it. I wouldn't necessarily say you need a sign language interpreter, but you do need to have a way that somebody can tell you that they need one. What are the accessible seating requirements? Does anybody know accessible seating requirements? That? Exactly, and it's got to be located on the accessible route. So it's not just 2%. You can't just put 2% in the very back. It's got to be interspersed throughout the entirety, and it's got to be on the accessible route. Lastly, if you are going to have a sign language interpreter, you need a place for those people to sit who need a sign language interpreter. You have a sign language interpreter up there, but that's open seating. Does that do the deaf person any good? No. So if you're going to have a sign language interpreter, have somewhere for them to sit. If you ever want to enjoy some videos, watch the rock and roll sign language interpreters. They are fantastic. That'll kill 2 hours of your time one night.
The Rihanna Super Bowl.
I was just gonna add that oftentimes you're thinking of, I'm gonna have a concert, I don't need an interpreter for that. How would an interpreter, interpret music? If you watched recent music awards, they were actually the greatest congratulations went to the interpreter in her style. And so there are interpreters that can interpret music, and it should be part of your offering to the public.
So next question, how many accessible parking spaces are required? So there's a permanent lot. That permanent lot has 2 parking spaces. That meets all the ADA requirements for the lot. Is that lot ADA accessible for your event? Probably not, because you're probably offering other parking. If you have 500 grass spots next to that permanent parking spot, now your temporary event requires more ADA parking. So what we see a lot of times, and this is completely acceptable, is 5-gallon bucket, throw some sand in there, throw an ADA sign in there, you have yourself a temporary ADA parking spot. It doesn't have to be permanent, it doesn't have to be long-term, but just that ability to throw up a little sign. Or what a lot of festivals will do is they'll say, this is just an ADA accessible parking spot. Everybody else can park wherever else they want to go. This is the ADA accessible parking spot.
And don't forget the access aisle.
Yep, access aisles, all that good stuff. So there is some work that needs to go into it, but it doesn't have to be permanent. It doesn't have to be there forever. It's a temporary event. You can do temporary ADA parking to accommodate that event.
Everybody know.
Does everybody know what we mean by access aisle? Jim just asked. So access aisle is Jim's a wheelchair user. So whenever he gets out of his van, because he drives, he has to swing his van out and then land in that access aisle. So if he's parked directly between 2 cars, he cannot get out of his van. So they have the access aisle, so that's where it's ADA parking space is 8 foot with that 5 foot access aisle. And the reason for that is to allow people to get out. Other interesting thing I'll say about the access aisle, because this comes up all the time.
You got those numbers.
Do I have
5 and 3.
Yeah, okay, sorry about that. And then the other thing I'll mention is you can park in that access aisle parking spot, however works best for you. Because if you're a wheelchair that exits from the passenger side, you might need to actually park in the access aisle and then use the other space to get out. So if that question ever comes up in your community, there's no wrong way to park in an access aisle, accessible parking space next to it.
Let me clarify, just give a quick example of that. Oftentimes you've seen somebody with a van and a lift on the passenger side. That's where they're normally located when they drop. I don't have that. I have a van and I have what's called a valet seat. The seat itself twists out and then drops down on the driver's side. So that's where my access is concerned. But if you had somebody for instance, who maybe has a child with a disability, they're probably using the lift on the passenger side. So that's why you have the versatility that you're hearing about from, Travis. The one thing I do want to clarify, we probably need to educate the, hanging tag elderly population that the access aisle is not for just parking. Oftentimes, I'll go to the grocery store or something, and I'll come out, and somebody with a hanging tag has decided to park right in the access aisle, and I can't get access. That's both in Illinois and federal law.
So location, big thing on location, accessible parking wise, always has to be the closest to the event, to the space. You can't say, well, I have an accessible parking lot that's half a mile away. You have a parking lot that's the closest, that's where your accessible parking goes. How many are required? It's based on the total parking of that event. So it's gonna be different than what it is on a day-to-day basis. And lastly, as Jim mentioned, that accessible route, just because you can park there doesn't mean you can get into the event. Do I need to provide accessible portable toilets? Absolutely. The thing I will warn you of, and I don't remember who gives this example, but someone gives a very good example. If you put your portable toilets in the road and the road's on like a 4% grade, they can't open the door to the toilet to get out because the door just closes on itself. So you can be in it, you're in your wheelchair, you gotta open the door to get out, but since it's on such a grade, the door just automatically closes. So we need to think about where we're putting those portable toilets. You know,
On a level grade.
this picture here, you know, imagine you're in a wheelchair. That's not an easy path to take. That's rock. A lot of times you'll see, they'll put the porta potties just in a grass field. And one of them will be accessible. It's not actually accessible. So we can spend a lot of time on portable toilets. Does anybody have any pressing issues on portable toilets? You don't want to.
I just want to ask, as far as the turf surfaces and accessibility, I mean, if it's flat and graded properly and smooth, you know, I mean, not full of, can turf be accessible in that for like a city festival or something?
AstroTurf.
As long as it doesn't rain, what's your plan if it rains? And that's the question is, it can, if it's bone dry and it hasn't rained in months, I'd argue that that could be accessible. But if you get rain, you're gonna have to, at that point, you're committing to moving your toilets to something else.
Slip resistant.
Yeah, slip resistant, you know. So I can't tell you that it's never not gonna be, but it's so weather dependent that, you know, even in the morning, if it's dewy in the morning, then question behind it.
Sure, what about Grass Creek? There's a product called Grass Creek. It's like this, watching the ground. Grass comes out of it, it's a flat surface. Now it doesn't have the, kid issue. It is a level surface. But that qualifies as accessible surface.
So the challenge of that is that it's going to be what that vertical separation is for that grass to come through, how much horizontal space you have there, and whether or not, if that sand's packed all the way to the top, you can make an argument, but once that sand starts settling below that quarter inch vertical displacement, so you can do it, but it's a lot of maintenance. And if you look at the front of Jim's, he's got those small little casters for his wheelchair. And that's the danger of those.
These are 8 inches compared to, the larger wheelchair there. These are 8. Sports folks, you might have seen the Ford sports gears. They have the small caster that's only 4 inches. If it can get caught in that, it's gonna send you flying.
So it's an old video, but if anybody would be interested, I'm sure we can get David Newberger with the city of St. Louis to share it.
Sure.
They went out, the botanical gardens in St. Louis put in all this pervious pavement. They put in those, pervious asphalt pavement, pervious concrete pavement, and they went over wheelchairs, canes, all that stuff. And basically provided a real-time video of people's experiences as to what it's like to travel on all these different, because I mean, it's a part of these buildings now, it's these pervious surfaces.
Yeah. CMAP.
Yeah, so that's something we can share for CMAP's website. It's a really interesting sort of user's perspective of what it's like to use those facilities. Yes, sir.
A lot of our events are put on by different organizations and not actually like the municipality itself. So is it up to the municipality to hold the organizer of the event to making the accommodations, or is it more on the municipality to?
Yes and yes. So I would strongly suggest as a municipality that you put it on the event organizer, but at the end of the day, you cannot third party away your ultimate responsibility. So you can put it on the organizer, but you should also be prepared to enforce what you put on the organizer. Because if anything happens, you're going to be included in that as well. Percentage must be on an accessible route. I believe the number is 10% of the total. Can animals be banned from an event? Can you ever ban an animal from an event? Any thoughts?
There's a specific nature event. People that are bringing dogs or something like that, you probably ban dogs for that event.
I would think as long as it's not a service dog. That's the big thing to remember. Service dogs are welcome anywhere that people are welcome. That service animal is also welcome. In that specific situation that you provided, there might be a bit of conversations that have to happen. But that's for 99% of the events, I'll say, if a person's welcome, the service animal is welcome. That doesn't mean you have to welcome unruly animals. As we already discussed, service dogs are specifically trained to provide a task. There's 3 questions you can ask. I'm gonna questions are. You can ask, what function does the service animal provide? And that's the main thing is service animals have a function. And you are allowed to ask what that function is. As Jim already mentioned, you cannot ask for certification. Not only have we seen it from the third-party sites that offer it, we've also seen some communities start saying that they want certification. Community cannot ask for that certification as well.
If you didn't get my tone before, I just want to add, this is not an easy issue, okay? Because we all love our pets. And as I've stated, people in my generation seems to want to take their pets everywhere. And so this is very controversial. It's still being somewhat clarified, if you will. But the general rule is what Travis has stated. But I just want you to know, you go home tonight, you read something online or whatever about a service animal issue, it's a hot topic across the country. Yes.
So microphone.
I'll start off. So talking about service animals, what's the ADA looking at with regard to emotional support? Ooh, this chicken or my Vietnamese pig is my emotional support. You can't ban me from this event because of that. So if you get these people that want to take their pet mama on the airplane and all that kind of.
Well,
this is llama
the
break.
case that kind of brought this to the light, if you will, the very first one was, out in San Francisco and Oakland area, the Bay Area Rapid Transit, somebody got on one of the cars with a boa constrictor around their neck, stating the same thing. They couldn't leave home without that. It was fine for them, but the rest of the people like me who really don't like snakes all got off the train. And so they made a decision that they said it is a dog. Or a miniature horse. Right, or a miniature horse. Really confused. If you want to know why the miniature horse got in there, I can tell you. In committee, there was a representative from Montana who had a miniature horse training area. And in the wonderful art of democracy and compromise, the miniature horse was added into the ADA regulation.
This suggests what the function of the boa constrictor was, what service they provided.
Claimed emotional support, as you're saying, but that's not covered by the ADA. The only place you can have the argument under emotional support if it's a veteran. And then we're into a whole nother discussion, and I need a room full of attorneys to describe it to you. So my safest thing to tell you right now is don't look at emotional support, look at what the function is that provides with a dog or a miniature horse. Other than that, to actually see the miniature horse perform things, I was very cynical about this. And I still am, to be honest, but they can perform functions similar to a dog.
Just curious, what were some of those functions of emotional support stuff, service center?
So sort of the main one we always think of is guide dogs. But also, there's dogs who,
Picking things up on.
picking things off the floor. There's dogs who can,
Assist
assist with propelling. who can
Detect seizures.
smell Whenever like someone might be going into like a diabetic shock or something like that. There's honestly an amazing number of different functions that could exist, but it's always fair to ask what's the function. And if someone has a service animal, they'll probably spend more time than you want describing what the function is. Because I mean, these dogs aren't cheap and they're not, these are a serious investment.
And let me clarify too, that, like I said to you, there could be confusion here. The emotional support animal for a student in public school will be different than what the ADA said. Not trying to confuse you more, I'm just trying to let you know that depending on which venue or which sort of government entity is ruling on the particular entity, it can be a different rule. As indicated, it can pick up things like, epilepsy, as well as diabetes. And so you see many school cases where they are allowed, or they may not have been allowed in another setting.
And this is where we'll talk about this later, but this falls under the category of if you have a question that you don't know the answer, ask me about it. Reach out. I was gonna say, I'm not here to claim I'm a service animal expert, but there are those experts that exist. So if this is a question that you have, reach out, ask for help, go from there.
Robin's really good.
Yes, so Robin Jones with Great Lakes is very, very good at the service. That's one of their areas. Modify policies to accommodate service animals. Drinking fountains. We don't often think about drinking fountains. What are the requirements for drinking fountains at a picnic? Anybody have any? If you offer a drinking fountain, you need to have an accessible version of that drinking fountain as well. So provide options to access fresh water. There are temporary accessible drinking fountains. It could just be that, you install one permanent drinking fountain that's accessible in the park. There's a bunch of different options, but these are the questions that as the ADA coordinator, you need to be asking. Responsibility. Who is responsible for temporary events? We already addressed that a little bit with the question. This is going to go across all the departments within the city. There's going to be Parks is going to be involved in this. You might have a special events department. Public Works is going to be involved in this. There's going to be a lot of different departments that are going to happen. I will also throw out there, this is a great use of your advisory committee. If you've held this festival for the last 20 years, odds are the disability community knows where the challenges are for that festival. So if you have a relationship with them, you can reach out to them and say, where do these challenges exist today? Lastly, ADA Title II Compliance Guide for Temporary Events. Link is going to be in this PowerPoint. We got a couple copies of it. If you reach out to Great Lakes, they can most likely get you another copy. But it's a nice little 20-page document that's got graphs and charts, all that good stuff of like how to lay out these events. Before we move on, any other questions on temporary events? Not seeing any community meetings. We already talked about this a little bit, so we'll go over this fast. City's hosting a public meeting on the second floor. Public notice was posted on the city's website. Invitations were sent to neighboring properties. Meeting will include a PowerPoint presentation and an opportunity to ask questions. So how do you plan for an accessible public meeting? Does anybody have any ideas on what we need to think about? Yes, sir. You can just say it loud. I'll just repeat you.
Well, second floor, you need to make sure there's an elevator or some way for people to recognize way to get up. Well,
Yep, elevator or some other way to get up to the next level. Any other thoughts? Yes, sir.
Parking ramps.
Parking.
To get into the building.
Yes, how do you get in, how do you park, how do you get inside the building? Any other thoughts? What else do we need?
Closed captioning on the PowerPoint potentially.
Closed captioning on the PowerPoint potentially. How about bathrooms? Should we be hosting a public meeting at a place that doesn't have an accessible bathroom? We gotta think about bathrooms. So we need to review the space. I'm a big proponent on roadway jobs, of hosting the public meetings where those citizens live. You know, don't make them drive all the way down to the county offices for a public meeting. Host it where they live and where they're gonna be impacted. But that means you're probably gonna have to go out and take a look at that space beforehand. Just give it a general sight. Most of the times, you can get a feel for whether it's accessible or not accessible.
One other area that's often forgotten is drop-off areas. It's huge.
So accessible parking spaces, path of travel, doorways, elevators, security. And this happened to me once at a public meeting. I didn't even think about it. Space was perfectly accessible, but you had to go through a metal detector, and the metal detector was not accessible. So metal detectors, a standard metal detector is not wide enough for a wheelchair. And the community we were hosting it at, the person could not get through without going through the metal. So we had to talk about a policy in which someone could be wanded off to the side to go through on their wheelchair. Never even went across my mind, but it happened. How do you plan for an accessible public meeting? Continued bathrooms, drinking fountains. I will say, I don't think you need to do an audit of every single place you're going to do a public meeting. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here is if it feels wrong, can you find a better place to do this? Lastly, seating and participation. If you have seating, you need to have accessible seating. Lastly, how does someone ask a question? If you have a spot for them to talk in front of a microphone and that's not accessible, you have another option that exists. You know, these are all the challenges that we need to think about. And again, in this particular situation, we're not talking about perfect compliance. What we're talking about here is, can you help someone communicate if they want to? Like, for example, that portable mic. If you have a main microphone stand down at the bottom of a council chambers, but you have a staff person who can run around with a portable mic, that can work. You just have to have someone who's dedicated to run around and ask their questions. So, location of the podium, portable microphones. Meeting announcement. Get your notice on all your meeting announcements as well. That's the best advice I can give you. Biggest thing again, always, if this question ever comes up, this is, in my own personal opinion, the quickest way to get yourself in trouble is asking them to pay for an accommodation. Like, if you get nothing else through to your city staff, be nice, participant never pays for anything. If you can get those two things through, you probably head off 50% of the problems you're ever going to face. Any big picture questions on meetings? I know I went through it quick, but we kind of talked about this already. Not seeing any sign language interpreters. We've already spent a lot of time on this as well, but this is really where it's critical of, if you have this information on your form, it completely changes your obligation during the event. So in this case, they have the little blurb down at the bottom that says, if you need accommodations, call us 2 weeks in advance. And as we already discussed, if they don't call, you might be able to, you know, pass notes or do whatever, but your obligations are different. So in this case, reach out to the resident to coordinate services. If someone called, sorry, I got a question right here.
Are you, is there a reasonable amount of time you set a month to get these? So the month, I just, as a resident, I would be accepting each of this 40 hours at a time. So how do I know that I want to attend a meeting?
No, for sure. It's a challenge that exists for your sort of big meetings. Like for the month delay is making this a lot more challenging. I would say that as a community, if they call you in advance, do everything that you can to help. But if you have that notice on there, you're giving yourself the opportunity to do alternative options. Because what you're gonna find is if someone calls 2 days beforehand, you're most likely not gonna get a sign language. But what you probably can do is get a virtual sign language, in which you do it through the iPad or something. So the big thing that the notice gives you is that it opens you up to look at those alternative accommodations. Because you're right, I mean, I don't think I've ever decided I'm going to a council meeting a month. I mean, honestly, the agenda's not posted. And the agendas are typically posted, what, 2-3 days before the meeting? So in that case, yeah, it's a challenge. But I think it's important to be flexible. If you can get that notice out there in advance, absolutely do it. If you can't, then I would suggest calling the person and saying, hey, I can get a sign language interpreter out here in 2 days. How can we communicate? You know, can we share notes? Can we do it through video? You know, if I have a computer for you, can you type it? I think all that stuff's on the table. So I think that's really where reach out to that resident to figure out what better.
This is another reason, from my viewpoint, when you're having your advisory committee from the community, to include disability organization. If you have one on there, they may have an interpreter on staff, number one. Number two, they may be well aware of interpreters sources that the general public is not aware of. So I think it's very important to, yes, have individuals with disabilities represented, but also their organizations because of what they might know on their policy.
So, big thing here I wanted to mention, in the state of Illinois, there is a qualified sign language interpreter. So there is a permit process to be considered a sign language interpreter in the state of Illinois. Who pays? You know, city always pays. The resident arrives at the meeting and says, I need a sign language. What are the city's obligations in this case? First question the government's going to ask, do you have that notice to the public? Even if it is only 2 days in advance, it's still that notice so you can work with it. And then at that point, you're just communicating to figure out what. I would strongly advocate to never just say, we can't help. It's, let's figure this out. You know, try, you know, anything that you can do to figure it out, put in that effort to figure it out. Mobile ASL services are available. Yes, sir. Microphone.
This may fall into the category of dumb question, but let's say that we post our agenda for a meeting and I get a phone call from a resident because I need to address the council or committee on this. It's an important issue. I need a American Sign Language interpreter. We can't find one. But the resident said, my son can translate for me. So we say, that's great. We'll work with you on that. Who pays the bill for the son? And where do we get the going rate for an American Sign Language interpreter? It's not actually credited by the state.
I was thinking the same thing, like, would it be reasonable to, you know, do just a quick, you know, single-use contract with a family member that can do it, you know, can I pay you $200 to come do this for a meeting tonight?
Yeah, I think that's negotiation, and I think, I mean, honestly, I'd make an argument that, you know, payment isn't even a requirement, like, you don't have to pay. I think the big thing is that you can never force the son to be the sign language. But if that's an offer that they make, absolutely, you can take them up on that offer. But I don't think you need to do a contract. I don't think you have to pay them. If the city wants to reimburse them, that's fantastic. But at that point, you're in the world of effective communication. And that's just the effective communication that works in that Yeah, so I don't think what you can, if someone calls 2 weeks in advance and says they need a sign language interpreter, I would not say, well, do you have anyone? But if they call the morning of the meeting and you say, well, I can't get one out here, and someone goes, well, I can bring my son along, it's like, fantastic, come along, you can interpret. Who pays again, never pay, the patrons never pay. So a citizen calls with a question. I recently attended a lecture at a religious facility and there was no interpreter present. Can I file an ADA complaint with the city? No. City ordinances require that I remove snow from the sidewalk in front of my house because of my disability. I cannot perform this function. What do I do? Oh, well. So I rented an apartment over the phone, and when I spoke to the.
You know, I know some communities do require, for instance, businesses to clear the snow out in front of them. Even I've run across communities before that require it of personal homes as well. In some of those situations, I know one of the cities we worked with, they worked with couple of local service organizations who were more than willing to go out and do the shoveling for a person or for a business because the person was elderly and they couldn't do it. And so the city, in a very good faith effort, and worked at putting the citizen together with the service center. Not a requirement, but a really good faith effort.
So last thing here is I rented an apartment over the phone. When I spoke to the landlord, he promised me it was accessible. It's not. What do I do? The whole point of all this is stop, take a breath, and you are not going to know the answer to every single question. And that's fine. Reach out for help, reach out for assistance. You know, to that fact, we're running low on time, but there's 15 pages of resources we provided at the end of this PowerPoint. You know, CMAP has Mayor's Caucus, Great Lakes ADA Center is a great resource. If you guys want disability awareness training, there's local disability agencies that offer disability awareness training. All these links are out there. Interpreters, Chicago Hearing Society, big ones down here at the bottom. Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf. That is the state of Illinois' registry of qualified sign language interpreters. So all that's out there if you're looking for it. Braille, for Horizons for the Blind and Chicago Lighthouse. They have the ability to produce Braille documents. You're going to pay them to do it, but they have the ability to produce it. Centers for Independent Living. They are the people who are going to know people in your community. You know, they have the list of people that they work with for services. If you're saying, I want to start an advisory committee and I don't know where to start, I'd strongly suggest reaching out to them. It is Illinois sponsored and they all have their own areas throughout the Chicago region. So like Progress Center for Independent Living, Suburban Cook County, Access Living is the city of Chicago, and then just, you know, on and on. Federal agencies, everybody has a technical assistance. If you have a question for the Department of Justice, I'd call the Department of Justice and ask it. You know, General Service Administration, website accessibility. They have technical assistance on website accessibility. The federal government's figured out that this is a challenge for everyone, and they offer really good technical assistance for it. US Access Board, they are the ones who develop the guidelines, so they're great at resources. Fair Housing Wise, US Housing and Urban Development. State agencies, Attorney General, you can call them and ask about disability issues. IDOT, they're provided their contact information and that you can reach out to them. Illinois Capital Development Board, this is the big one. Capital Development Board is who writes the Illinois Accessibility Code. There is one lady at the Capital Development Board who can provide interpretations of the Illinois Accessibility Code. Her name's Felicia Burton. Her contact information is through that link. So if you ever wonder, well, what does the Illinois Accessibility Code say about this? She will give you a definition for what that means. Illinois Division of Rehabilitation, Deaf and Hard Hearing. Main point of this is there's a lot of resources available to you. Bureau of the Blind, Secretary of State's Office. It's also good to have this contact information because someone might call you and say, I need to get a license. Who do I contact? You can direct them to the Secretary of State's office. So I think these are all great resources to kind of know and help your community. Other resources, ADA Coordinator Program, if anybody's interested in that, we can put that up there. We have this for module 1, but I'll modify the PowerPoint to get this in here. There's a very good website you can go to in which you can put your website into this website, and it'll tell you everything that's wrong with your website. So it'll flag all the issues with your website and tell you why it's not compliant. So I will modify the PowerPoint before you see that post it. But it's, you basically just copy and paste your website into their website, and then they'll search through it. Presentation goals and future sessions. As I mentioned, we sort of covered everything we need to cover today. Big thing is April 18th and 19th out in Naperville and Aurora. We are going to do self-evaluation ADA transition plans. That is going to be specifically focused on the public rights of way. So we're going to go over sidewalk collection, curb ramp collection, how to turn all that information into a transition plan, and all that good stuff. With that, just kind of open it up to sort of general questions at the end that anybody might have. I know we talked, oh, we got one question right here. That's fine.
Several times you mentioned the ADA coordinator, it's important for them to connect with the community and those that have a disability. So do you have any like examples of ways to do that?
I would start your Center for Independent Living. I think that's a great place to start because they are providing services to people in the community. What I found is that a lot of times they can kind of search by your community's boundaries, and then they'll sort of develop a list of potentially interested community members who might be interested in helping out the community. So Centers for Independent Living is a great place to start. I know we covered a lot today. Thank you very much for your attention over the 4 hours. You're going to have questions in the future. Please ask those questions. As Jamie mentioned, this is a multi-year commitment. So we're going to have future trainings. We're going to have future coordination. So if stuff comes up, do not be afraid to ask that question. We are going to send out a survey. It will be emailed out, as well as there's a QR code in the presentation itself. If you can fill it out, we'd appreciate it. The big thing that you can do is if you want to know more about something else, that's a great way to tell us what else you're looking to know. With that, I'll say thank you very much for your time. And Jim has 3 copies of the temporary events, and then everybody else will have more. We'll coordinate that. You want to tell the chat we're all wrapped up?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all.
Thank you. Nothing new. Just that we have the link for the IDOT connection, but it's in the chat, so.
Okay. Yeah. Write that down or take a picture of it.
I have it right here. If you want.
Yeah.
DOT.D1.ADA.
Okay, awesome. Just because I'm gonna forget it.
Yeah, I can take a picture of it. Yep. Yeah.